Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Johnathan Pritchett, and along with me is
Braxton Hunter.
And today we have Leighton Flowers again, of course. Happy to have Leighton Flowers for Soteriology 101 to continue to discuss the debate between Tim Barber and James White. And this week we have Tim Barber. How you doing?
Doing really well. Thrilled to be on. I've been fans of your work as individuals and as a group for a long time, and I love what happens down at Trinity.
Really? Are you knew about Trinity Radio before we got a hold of you?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And my Facebook friend before your Facebook friend, by the way.
Yes, we know.
But Tim
no
Barber,
one cares.
Tim Barber was one of 2,700 some odd Facebook friends after I did the Great Purge, and you survived it, even though I still didn't know who you were. And then you're this guy that's debating James White, and I didn't really know a whole lot about you. Who are you? What do you do? What is your ministry? And then how did you get into this debate? And give us some thoughts about that. So answer all of those questions.
Yeah, happy to do it. I also just recognized, ironically, that I'm wearing a shirt that's got flowers on it, so that's fun.
Of course you do.
But I'm Tim Barber. Why wouldn't I? It's wonderful name. So yeah, my name's Tim Barber. My ministry is called The Overlap Life. I was a teacher at a Spanish-speaking church out here in Colorado for a good long time, and I did a sermon series from April to August of 2021 where I was talking about eschatology. And not all the stuff that we argue about in eschatology, but really the things that we should all be in agreement on. That God plans to restore the universe, that he plans to heal and do for the whole cosmos what he did for Jesus Christ at Easter is kind of the way that I would frame it up, the way N.T. Wright talks about it. And really how to live in light of that reality. So, living in light of the fact that our eternal future is physically embodied and not just some, spiritual, ethereal thing, and that we can participate in the coming kingdom now. Really just helping people live in light of what the Bible really says about eternity and having an eternal perspective, which is hilarious because that's not really, I'm not really focused on an open theist teaching platform. That's not really my main goal. It just kind of came about in terms of how the debate came about. There are a couple of people. My understanding is
Tim,
yes.
Tim, before you talk about how the debate came about, I'm really just wondering if you read that material, because if you read it, I don't think we can really acknowledge its truthfulness or really respond to you in any meaningful fashion. And so I just want to know if that's something that you came up with off the top of your head or if you wrote it down beforehand, because if you wrote it down beforehand, this is over and I'm leaving.
Done.
I've learned my lesson. This is all off the cuff.
Okay. All right. Go ahead then. Tell us how you got into the debate. Just wanted to know that.
Hilarious. So in terms of how the debate came about, my understanding is that there were a couple of people who Dr. White wanted to debate that did not want to debate him, and vice versa. There were a couple of people that wanted to debate Dr. White that Dr. White did not want to debate. So the only real way forward, he who shall not be named, as he's called on my channel in this context. But I think this was the benefit of me being a total unknown, of me having no background in debate, no background. And all I had done is have 2 or 3 videos saying why I don't think Calvinism makes any sense, and sort of a comparative analysis of the 4 views of God's relationship to the future. And that was all we had to go on.
Yeah, you're like the Mark Hamill of the theological world. Nobody knew who you were before. This is your thing.
I take that as an enormously high compliment. So yes, I suppose you could say that. But it came about because I just felt a pull. I felt a pull that as the debate was coming together and we were getting to be about a month and a half out and there was no movement on it and people were still asking around and trying to figure out something, I just asked Will Duffy, who was one of the people who was being considered for the debate, if he could put me in contact with the person who's organizing it, which is Aaron Carlson, Pastor Aaron Carlson of New City in Denver. Fantastic person, wonderful guy. We disagree on Calvinism, but he's a wonderful man, and so is his son. But I just reached out, and in about 15 minutes, they're like, yeah, he's game if you are. And so that was all it took.
Nice. And where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at... Yep, in the description for sure. It's nice and simple. You just go to theoverlap.life, and that's my website. You can find my book there. If you go to theoverlap.life/YouTube, it'll take you straight to my YouTube channel. And if you do theoverlap.life/sub, it'll take you straight to where you can subscribe.
Tim, real quick, maybe you just touched on it and I missed it, but why the overlap life?
So this could get really, really hairy. Okay, this could get really technical, so I'll try to shorten it as much as I can. The concept of overlap is what I'm talking about is this age and the age to come. Okay, or God's space and human space. So in the beginning, Genesis 1 and 2, God's space and human space are totally overlapping. There's no separation. God is dwelling with humanity in the world that he made and called good, and the humans are tasked with being his co-rulers over the creation, taking it all someplace beautiful in service to him with the delegated authority God gives them. Interestingly, Revelation 21 and 22, it's the same picture, right? Revelation 21 and 22 is a recapitulation on all those themes from the first 2 chapters of the Bible, and now the last 2 that are depicting the eternal state. It's almost as though what God has always wanted, when things are ideal, it's he is coexisting with humans in the same space, and they're collaborative partners taking the world he made someplace beautiful together in a mutual partnership. Now, of course, that's 4 chapters out of the whole Bible. There's 1,185 chapters in between those 2 where things are not the way that they should be. So my contention is that at the fall, God's space and human space was separated, and then God's plan and his project was to try to get them to overlap again. Starts with the tabernacle, right? Where God's space is literally inhabiting a spot inside the physical creation again. And then the temple in a more permanent manner. And then also ultimately in Jesus, and then in those who Jesus has rescued. So it's like he's working on the project of getting them to overlap more fully until he completes the job in the new heavens and new earth.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And Lauro, I hope I got that right. Thank you for that super chat. Really appreciate that. It made me think of how the atheists used to speak about completely overlapping magisteria or partially overlapping magisteria when they're talking about, I think, religious stuff and natural stuff. But you believe that we will have coma, and we did have coma, completely overlapping magisteria. But right now we have partially overlapping magisteria. Yeah. I really like that.
And I would even separate, just to throw one more nuance at that. I would separate, for example, sacred secular thinking. I don't think that really the Bible allows us to have anything that resembles sacred secular thinking. It's all a moral dimension. It's all got again, people think about this in terms of even their theology of work. It's, the people that are really serving God are the pastors, evangelists, and missionaries, but they just get rid of the folks who are doing work that creates order and beauty, that makes life flourish, that alleviates brokenness and pushes back the power of evil in the world. They just look at all that stuff and say, well, that's secular work because it's not just this sort of spiritual or religious dimension. So yeah, a big part of my work is also kind of helping people to understand that there really is no sacred secular divide, that everything is sacred. And it's a matter of cashing out what it means to be a Christian in every single context.
Well, praise the Lord.
To all the people saying idol killer should be on, let me tell you about Warren before we get into the rest of this show. Warren receives a link to get on Trinity Radio every week. And every week he ignores that link. So I don't care that he's not here because he can be on Trinity Radio when he wants to be, and he's not. So Warren, blame Warren for why Warren is never on Trinity Radio. It's his fault entirely.
There was a future in which this path was open to Warren.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into this.
Right. We were covering the debate last week, and we went through your opening statements, and it's going to be fun to have you here because we try to be gracious to both parties. I mean, obviously we are those people that, even though we're not open theists, we have a partial bias against Calvinism, more so Leighton than everyone else here, I think, because he has a whole show dedicated to dumping on Calvinism, which is fine. But we went through the opening statements, but it's going to be interesting to have you not only respond to maybe what you didn't get to say to White in the debate, plus all of our content, but to evaluate yourself and some of your own comments in the debate. I think that'll be a lot of fun to have you say, well, I mean, yeah, I could have said that better, or I really miffed that one, or whatever. Just I'd like to give you a chance to respond. But before I play the first clip, were you nervous?
It's so bizarre. It's so strange. I really wasn't. I really just was not nervous about it.
Are you nervous today?
No. I love this stuff.
You're not intimidated by Leighton Flowers or Braxton Hunter?
Yeah, I think it's something about having ADHD that just stressful situations and situations that require my absolute focus and attention. Maybe even if, even scary folks driving bad on the highway, I don't mind that stuff.
Okay.
Well, I'll whistle.
That's not fair. Why didn't God make me like that? I wish I never got
right. He gets right now on the thumb. We grabbed one of the comments that you had made that my opponent utterly failed. You were not shy with the rhetoric there.
No, there were more straightforward comments that I chose not to use because I was like, we don't want to go that far.
Yeah. I knew who I was entering into a debate with. Yeah. And I knew that I could not just concede my space so lightly. I wanted to make sure and make clear that I love the man, and I'm grateful that, again, we'll be in the new heavens and new earth together, worshiping our Lord forever and ever, where we'll never believe anything false again. And we could probably both affirm that statement. But although I love the man, I hate his Calvinism, and I hate his view, and I hate what his view, the entailments, again, because not necessarily all things that someone affirms are entailments, and not all things that are entailments are something that somebody affirms. But the entailments of his view, I think, make God a monster. And I was not shy in making that clear.
Yeah. Now, even after having a week's worth of time, I did not slow any of these clips back down to the original speed. They are still at 1.5. So pay.
Going to be listening to Ben Shapiro on double speed here.
Right. All right, here we go. We're starting with this first four clips are going to be some comments. I think
you thought my opener was fast. Wait until you listen to this.
I'm not sure. You had mentioned something about won't believe anything false again. I think I took a comment where both of y'all were saying something of the sort of the debate, but Braxton told me that we need to get rid of this. I'm not saying I disagree with that we won't believe false things, but there was something, and I don't think we have the clip, so I'm going to elaborate it now. I would like to have a discussion about what people think we will know once we get to, because there's a part of me that thinks that Pelagius and Augustine are still having a fight, and Jesus is like, I'm not solving that. I'm going to let them, this is what they want to do. I'm going to let them have their heaven and argue about this for all eternity. Because I don't believe that we become God. So I don't believe that we get omniscience and all of a sudden we know all things. And I wonder if, while there are answers to things that God will give some individuals in heaven, he's like, I'm gonna tell you that. And so
this is my wheelhouse, though, because now we're talking about the difference between the intermediate state and the eternal state, right? So intermediate state, I'm not an adherent of what you might call soul sleep, where people are sort of not conscious and waiting for the resurrection. I don't think that makes, there's too many passages that clearly describe someone having a cognitive experience in the afterlife, the intermediate state, wherever they're, if they're in the presence of God, or even if they're not in the presence of God. And that's a whole other discussion, right? But I agree that we don't become God, but I do have an affinity for the idea of like an orthodox theosis.
Sure.
Heiser would frame this up as like, and again, we'll have to get into debate, and we don't want to get sidetracked on all my hobby horses, but Heiser would say that we become, he looks at that 1 John passage where it says that in seeing him, that is Jesus, we become like him, right? That's kind of what he's anticipating is his future experience. So I anticipate that we'll all become as close as possible to Christ's nature without becoming another member of the Godhead.
Right. I'm fine with theosis, but even Jesus as incarnate, which we will always be incarnate in new bodies, he had to grow and learn and stature. I don't think that we stop learning, which means I don't think we immediately start knowing. So when someone says, well, R.C. Sproul's in heaven, but he's not a Calvinist anymore, and I'm like, well, he might still be. He might be arguing with
hopefully that part of it will just be solved by then. I mean, look, if we can ask anybody, if we can interact with biblical characters and we could just bounce it off Paul, I think maybe we could learn the answer to that one pretty quick.
Oh, so everything Paul says becomes easier to understand in the new. No, Paul's still going to be Paul. He's going to say things that Peter's going to be like.
Do you think that Paul is going to give us some kind of a Jordan Peter answer to the question of whether Calvinism is true when we lay it out specifically for him?
Okay,
I think this is a problem of the flesh. I think that once we're free of the limitations of the flesh, that these are things that God can help us to sort through in a more direct way. But again,
all right, debate. Move on. Debate.
Yeah,
let's go on to the debate.
First clip from Dr. White's rebuttal.
The language that was used. A number of times it is said fated. I reject fate, every Christian does, and that's a straw man misrepresentation that no one who has ever read any meaningful Reformation material would ever make. You never talk about fate. Fate is impersonal. It's not a decree from God. Okay, so put that one out. Nothing's fated. That is a misrepresentation. It's a straw man, and I will ask Tim to stop saying that. He then used the term deterministic. I'm not a determinist. I'm a decretalist. The decree of God is the personal decision on the triune God's part to bring about his own glory in creation. It's intensely personal. In fact, it's so personal that it involves the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity. That's not determinism. Determinism is a philosophical concept that has nothing to do with the decree of God. And they use that to impersonalize it.
Okay, so everyone knew that this comment was going to come up, and everybody is so focused, like a laser on the second half of that clip, which the thing that they're thinking is, I'm not a determinist, is probably what everyone was talking about, but it was the latter half of the it's so personal incarnation thing. And I'm sorry, we made a t-shirt for stuff like this, but so I want to, that's the part that really, but not as much as the first part about fate, because if I was sitting in that debate, I would have been like, no, I'm going to keep using that word fate.
Put up the screen I just shared. Here's a basic definition of fatalism from Oxford. Okay, the belief that all events are predetermined and therefore inevitable. That's what the word means. William Lane Craig uses it all the time when talking about theistic determinists, because it is what fatalism is. Now, I know they don't like that term, because it strikes within people this concept and idea, therefore nothing we do matters. And that's an entailment, not an actual claim of what Calvinists believe. Calvinists do not believe, therefore it doesn't matter, like some fatalist might do. And so as long as you put in that caveat, you can still say these people are fatalist, but they still believe our decisions matter in some mysterious way.
Yeah,
right.
That's the difference.
I think that they're engaging in cognitive dissonance, and that they don't have any place to put that belief or coherently connect it to what they believe about reality in terms of their metaphysics. But I agree that, again, there's a difference between an affirmation, what someone affirms to be true in their system, and then what is an entailment of their affirmations.
Right.
Yeah. And to be fair, about the William Lane Craig comment, William Lane Craig uses the word fatalism also with respect to the simple foreknowledge view in that Divine Foreknowledge for Views book. He was actually accusing David Hunt of being a fatalist, like even more so than the Calvinist, because God could never, because God has just, there's no distinctions between free knowledge and natural knowledge, or even middle knowledge for the Molinists. God is just eternally simple, eternally known, never not known, never not had any other ways of knowing. And so he was fated to create that which he knew he would without any sort of divine contingency, which is a real problem for the simple foreknowledge view that I've never really heard a good response to. So it's not like fate is always hurled at Calvinists. William Lane Craig hurled it at the Arminian simple foreknowledge view. But let's go back to the past. Let's go back to the ancient Second Temple Judaism world. It's not like Second Temple Jews in a monotheistic context, especially the most prominent being Josephus, but there were others. They would use, when writing in Greek to discuss different views of providence, fate was a view that they would attribute to other monotheists, not pagans. Early church fathers used the word fate, not just with respect to pagans, but also monotheistic, especially more heretical views of monotheism. So it's not this idea that fate is some sort of pagan, impersonal, whatever. It's not even true. And which surprises me, because Dr. White would know all that he's taught church history. So he knows that. Well, I think Greek speakers, that word's always been used, and even in monotheistic, because it's just a useful word to communicate this idea of fated to happen. Like,
I understand that, and I think that's the sort of way we should look at it, because that's the history of religion on this. But the reality of the popular understanding of fate as it exists and perhaps seeps into the minds of people listening is on determinism, you have this chain of dominoes sort of thing, this causal determinism. And on fate, it's more like you see this in movies where it's like someone finds out that they're going to die in Hawaii tomorrow, so they get on a plane to go to like London, but somehow terrorists take over the plane and it ends up in Hawaii and they end up dying anyway. So that you may have libertarian free will, but ultimately what is going to happen because it's fated. Now, that's, I think, one of a couple of popular level views on it. And maybe that's what's seeping into people's minds, but that doesn't mean that it's what we should consider when we're talking about the domain of religions that are adjacent to or surround the Christian movement.
Right. My issue with these terms is, and I brought this up in the debate, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to do it, is that really these terms come from a Hellenized worldview. They come from a fundamentally Greek philosophical worldview that is, I would contend, and again, this is maybe be a longer conversation for a different day, but I would contend that is foreign to the Jewish mindset that produced the Old and New Testaments.
Yeah,
right?
I would totally shred you on that in a different. I would love to have that debate because there's no such thing as pure Hebrew thought. Even the Maccabees who hated Hellenism were already. It's a bell you can't unring. I mean, you can blame Philip and Alexander for that, but no, there's. And I remember hearing Greek thought is cyclical, while Hebrew thought is more linear. And I'm like, okay, go read Ecclesiastes and come back to me about this linear business. I mean, he's going to at least listen to the Wings song that comes from that. I was like,
well, actually, Pritchett, this is something I was thinking about as I was reading the book that that Tim recommended that I read in preparation to talk to him, and because I asked him what he would recommend, and I was thinking about this with respect to how the philosophical side of the dynamic omniscience discussion works. So like people will offer for open theism, the biblical case, the philosophical case, all these different, just like we do for any particular position in systematic theology. And then what I came to wonder was, okay, when we get to the other end of this from creation, to where we're talking about God's knowledge of the future, and how, one of the big criticisms is how would this what's the truth maker for this? What's the alethic way we can know this? What's the, it seems like there's a lot of philosophy that goes behind that case to make that there's no truth maker for this. And therefore, when I could imagine a simple believer saying, dude, all that pagan philosophy you're bringing into this, man, the fact is God just knows what's going to happen. So how do you respond to the criticism from the other end?
Yeah, it's so funny. I could also say, well, it's also intuitive that it's not we don't know ahead of time if it's gonna go one way or the other. Like we have to be able to make a proof for it. Everyone always does philosophy. I think that I love the Lewis quote. I know Leighton brings this up frequently. The Lewis quote of good philosophy must exist if only to give an answer for bad philosophy.
Right.
And I think that good philosophy is in a Christian context, and I would say that this is just true because I'm a Christian, and that's kind of one of my axioms is that Christianity is true, by the way, to borrow from Tutsi. But the good philosophy is that which is adjudicated accurately by the scriptures, the way that they present themselves to be understood, right?
Yeah, but what I caution people is don't try to say there's Hebrew thought versus Greek thought as if by the first century it's too far apart, because what it means is we have to be more careful, and it's not the similarities that are important. It's actually the differences, and you've got to highlight those differences and tease those out. Because if you look, there's like three, depending on who you listen to, 3 to 5 Greek cities right there in Galilee, right? I mean, so it's not. So the idea, Hinkle disavowed this whole notion that used to be, well, it's some backwater, hillbilly part of Israel, and it's like, no, that doesn't really work either. And Jerusalem was cosmopolitan as just about any other. So it's the difference.
And when I say Hebrew thought, I also mean it's fundamentally the context, the thinking that produced the Old Testament, and that Hebrew thought itself is also shaped by other influences in the
ancient Near Eastern thought is what you was. And how do the Hebrews? Where are they similar? Where are they different? And that's very important too to bring out. And so wait
a minute. So
that's where I think.
It seems like what you're saying, Tim, does anyone want to donate $100 so that Pritchett has to close his mic off for 3 minutes? But I just wanted to say, it sounds like so it sounds like if I'm steelmanning your position here, what you're saying is it's not that the Greeks are wholly wrong or it's wrong to appeal to what we might call Greco-Roman philosophy or Greek philosophy. The idea instead is, well, where it's right. And if it's in conflict with scripture, then it's wrong. Or you could even perhaps say if it's in conflict with reason, then it's wrong. And primarily for you, it seems like the sticking point for open theists has to do with, usually, I'll speak in generalities, usually with open theists, it has to do with the nature of time and with some aspects of God's nature, whether he's immutable in the way that classical theists want to say he's immutable, and whether what his omniscience is, right? This is basically when we talk about pagan Greek philosophy's influence on Christianity, isn't it those things that you want to highlight primarily?
That's a solid way of framing it up. Yeah, I can give an example, right? So the practice of, we could call it the apophatic theology, trying to get at what God is by philosophizing about what he can't be or what he is not, right? That practice isn't wrong in and of itself, but if the way that we do that, for example, goes against God's clear self-revelation in scripture, where he says that he is loving and kind and patient, right? And he says that he shows mercy to the 1000th generation. If we have something that we're doing apophatic theology to say this is what God must be like, that denies in some way that he is relational, then I think that apophatic theology is going against the scripture, and scripture takes precedence.
Yeah. Gregory Fisher asked an important question. Is Greek thought and Second Temple Judaism the same? Yes and no, because when somebody says Greek thought versus Hebrew thought, or Greek thought or Hebrew thought, I always say, well, what Hebrew and when? Because there's no, because I could find you a Hebrew who thought about something, about anything. And same with a Greek thinker who thought anything could be even closer in alignment with Hebrew thought than other Greeks or whatever. So it's like saying American thought. Well, American thought in the Pacific Northwest, American thought in the South, American thought in the Pacific Northwest in the 1800s versus American thought in the South in 2000.
Urban American thought or rural American thought?
Right. Did you say there was thought in the Pacific Northwest? Did you just say there was thought in the Pacific Northwest? I guess Chris Date's up there. So, but anyway, let's get back on with this, but you got to understand, folks, that it's going to get derailed. I know some people said last time, I don't know if this became a debate review or lacked being a debate review, but everybody seemed to enjoy it. But the fact is, if we have an open theist on here who's a thoughtful guy who seems to know this stuff, we're going to be interested to, push and be pushed on some of these issues that surround that. But anyway, Pritchett, take us to the debate specifically.
Yeah, I wanted to get your thought first on Tim on the I'm not a determinist, and then the impersonal language. When I can line up in my head, when I heard that, I could line up 100 Calvinists who are like, determinism is not a bad word. Divine determinism is not impersonal. They would say, oh, it's so personal. Determinism is so personal that God picked you. Against any of the also decreed evil in you and all of this stuff that we could all hash that out. But what were you thinking? Because I was thinking,
Yeah, it's rhetoric. It was empty rhetoric. Guillaume Bignon owns the term determinism and flaunts it, and he's every bit the Calvinist adherent that James White is. And
White touted his book, by the way. Right. White touted Keithley's book several times. So,
did you say Keithley or Bignon?
I'm sorry, I'm quoting. I'm reading something from Keithley right now, but from Bignon, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Regardless, again, I just think that these terms are distinctions without a difference. I think that what he really, again, wanted to do was avoid some of because I would situate fate and determinism I would situate that squarely in Greek philosophical classical theist thought, right? Those terms sort of come to us from that realm. And then we apply them in theistic ways, looking at the Bible from, the kind of a God of an Aristotle or a Plato or a Socrates, their concept of what the spiritual realm must be like, and Platonic forms and things that are physical or bad, and all of that whole worldview set of assumptions. I think that fate and determinism come to us from that world, and then get applied to a version of Christianity. I mean, and then decretalism is trying to make that a biblical term and reject these because it doesn't like the associations. I think that White used the term decretalism and is favoring that term now because he does not like the associations.
Yeah, I just found that weird. And then the whole idea of it, the incarnation, to me, that just sound like the pseudo pious sanctimonious talk that had nothing to do with determinism or free will or open. I'm like, to say because you're not a determinist because it's so impersonal and it's so personal that Jesus became incarnate. It's that I'm like, what does that have to do with determinism? That just sounded like piety talk to me and is useless. But
you do not pull your punches. I appreciate that about you.
I was like, this is just that sanctimonious blather that I have a shirt for, because I didn't make that connection at all about incarnation and why determinism is impersonal. Because if it's divine determinism, a person is behind the determinism. So,
right, it's just one more step. It's just one more step. He framed it later on, I think it was in the Q&A, where as he was discussing this again, he sort of surfaced these ideas once more. And when he did, he was saying essentially that fate and determinism are sort of impersonal forces. They're not. It's not a personal force that's bringing this about. It's not a personal decision made by the triune God with his eternal decree that he works out in time and kind of all the things that he adds onto it. And that's what those are all the things that he affirms about his version of determinism,
right,
which he calls decretalism, but it's still the same. Yeah. It's still the same thing fundamentally.
Which sounds like every other form of divine determinism. We have a question. When did James White first claim to be a decretalist and not a determinist, like 1 month ago?
First time I heard it was on his discussion with Marlon Wilson on the program like a month ago, a month and a half.
Oh, so this was before the debate. He had said something about this, but
but go back
for the debate.
Go back to the debate with Tim Stratton from what is that, a year and a half ago now, and he was, I think, whether he specifically said that or not, I remember him not wanting to engage with that sort of language then too. So I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen, but I think he was definitely operating on that. I've noticed for years that while he will reference compatibilism and determinism, he won't ever dwell on them and go deep on them or talk about the philosophical merits, virtues, or problems that can, occur. And I think it's because I'm just saying this. I don't mean this as any insult to James White. I think that he's more comfortable. I don't think that's insulting to say, more comfortable using the theological language. And so he shies away from the philosophical language on this.
Well, and that's what I posted that from Keithley, where he talks about, decretal theology is actually just philosophy masquerading as theology. Decretal theology is just deterministic philosophy, but attributing it to God. That's all it is. And he knows that. But I think the first time he brings that up is in his discussion with Marlon as he's preparing for his debate, because he does not want to have to deal with the implications of theistic determinism. He knows that it's the same thing. It's the same reason you see him run from equating the concept of drawing Helco to regeneration in my debate. He purposefully did that so he didn't have to defend pre-faith regeneration, because he knows that's a hard thing to defend. He saw Gabe Hughes get stuck in that trap with me. He didn't want to have to deal with it. So he ran from his previously stated views, and that's exactly what he did with Tim Barber. When Tim brings up determinism, I just redefine what I am to decretalism, therefore now I don't have to answer the age-old arguments against determinism. And that's his way of just kind of sidestepping the I'm not a determinist, I'm a decretalist. Okay, so what? And Tim, you answered it beautifully.
Best moment
by the way,
of the debate for me, Leighton. That was the best moment of the debate for me.
Where you just read the same statement and you changed the word determinism to decretalism, and you said, now answer the question. Right. And he never does. He can't.
The mechanism is the same, which is exactly right. And so I thought that was a brilliant line from you. I think we probably have that in the clips coming up. But yeah, I was just curious about that. Braxton had mentioned the Stratton White debate and kind of wanted to shy away from that. But I go back to the William Lane Craig White debate that was on Unbelievable, and Craig said, "Well, of course you disagree. You're a determinist. You're a determinist," and he never pushed back on the term then, at least. So
that's right.
So as far as I guess we could put this but he could use whatever terms you like, because Tim's ultimate point was the mechanism the same. So
I'm getting a kick out of Nick Quaint's decretalism is the most leading term since gender affirming care, and decretalism is the most misleading term since fat free.
Yeah. All right.
Great.
Any more thoughts on?
One last thing I want to say. There will be Calvinists who watch this, as every time we have an open theist on, and say, see there, they obviously just hate Calvinism so much that they're willing to. Here's the thing. When Calvinists are cool with us, we do exactly the same thing we're doing with Tim Barber right now. Just look at any of the videos where I've had Chris Tate or Eli Ayala on, and I think that resolves that. So,
yeah. All right.
No, it won't resolve it, but it is an answer.
Yeah. All right. Clip number 2.
The illustration I used before. Yahweh is walking with Abram, and they're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot, the destruction, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think Abraham was changed by going to bat? 40, 30, 20, please forgive me, 10. Do you think Yahweh needed to be changed? Did he need to be made better? Do you think the Bible tells us that God knows the thoughts and intents of the heart of every person perfectly? Do you think God really was sitting up in heaven going, wow, I wonder if Abraham's going to go through with this sacrifice thing? I really don't know. We'll find out. You have to allow all the Bible to speak. Who was changed in that? Abram? And I'll bet you Isaac was too. What do you think? Yeah, I think so too.
All right. So this is the line from Scripture is, and we talked about this last week, so I don't want to, but the line is, now I know. But White here seems to be, well, his first attempt at philosophically explaining this at all was the eternal versus end time thing, which he never actually explained, that there's a theory or maybe two of time behind that he didn't go into. So we're just assuming that for the sake of argument that whatever, it sounded like a B theory thing, I guess. So he didn't defend that, and he said he's not a presentist. So whatever. Okay. But so that's all he gives to explain. So now he's saying, okay, this is about changing Abraham and Isaac, but that's not really. But the text says, now I know something. I gave my explanation. I like philosophy. For all you people, well, theology versus theology is philosophy. It's philosophizing about God stuff, period. So it's just philosophy about divine stuff. It's not, theology is no more lofty because it's about God stuff. It's just philosophy about, that's what theology is. So no problem there. But what is this? What is this? I'm sure we're all Tim will be changed. Leighton will be changed. I will be changed. Braxton will be changed because we had a conversation. Okay. But the line of Scripture that you have to deal with is not something about a change in them. It's about God saying, now I know. Now we all have different ways of explaining that, but what was your, Tim, take it away.
Yeah, I was hoping we would surface this because I heard your explanation last week and was
jump on it all you want to. Don't care.
Furiously pounding the keyboard, but now I get to talk to you in person about it. Well, more or less in person. But yeah, so we're talking about Genesis 22:12,
yeah,
right, where it's in the middle of the binding of Isaac's story, and Abraham has taken Isaac up the mountain and is preparing to sacrifice him according to God's instructions. And then the angel of the Lord, okay, which again, this is a whole discussion. Is this a pre-incarnate Christ? Is it just a messenger of God, but it speaks for God and people speak to it as though it's speaking to God? However you cash that out. In some ways, this is God present talking to Abraham. And he says, stop, don't lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear me because you were not going to spare your only son. So the issue I had with let's start with Dr. White, and then I'll kind of turn the crosshairs on you and we can talk about it. The issue I have with Dr. White is that he just flat out is ignoring the text as written. He's completely ignoring it. It's not a point of contention that Abraham was changed. It's not a point of contention that Isaac was changed. Right. Those things are almost a given from the situation. You have an encounter with God where you think the situation is one thing, and then God turns it around in a beautiful way. And I'll even agree with the foreshadowing of the sacrifice of the lamb on the same mountain 2,000 years later. I can grant all of that. And of course they were changed. But the text says, now I know. And it gives the timing now and the reason. for the change in God's knowledge, not the change in God's essence, not the change in God's nature, not the change in God's character. Those things we should all be thankful are unchanging. He is a consistent being of absolute goodness, but his knowledge changed. Okay. And it's, again, the timing and the reason. Now I know, since you did not spare your son, or you were willing to not spare your son.
Now I know that you fear me since you did not.
Correct. Yeah. Now I know that you fear me. So the issue is that word "know" is yada in Hebrew, right? It's Strong's 3045, I think. Don't quote me on that. You can look it up. And in 99% of cases, it means a change in the content, like a change in the possession of a propositional fact. Okay, it is a propositional word in nine times out of 10. So it could mean there's an experiential knowledge aspect of this, but it's not a know how to or know how it feels so much as it is knowing something that is, it's a mental dimension, it's a mental component. So in the same way that in Hebrew, I'll finish this thought super quick. In the same way in English, if we want to add a phrase to know, to make it know how to, or know how it feels, there are phrases that get added to yada, and it's many different forms, right? To make it something other than propositional knowledge. And in this passage, it's just propositional knowledge, is what it seems to me. You'd have to find a way to look at the Hebrew.
Well, hold on.
Find a place for that to fit. Elsewhere.
Tim, what about, and this is just me totally off the top of my head, what about when scripture says that someone knows someone and it means it sexually? Surely that's speaking of an experience.
Genesis 4:1. Right. Genesis 4:1. Okay. Exactly. It does use that word, but there is a word after it. I'd have to go and dig up the interlinear, but there is a word after it, or a little particle after it, that changes the nature of the way that thing is understood in the sentence. But you're right. That is how the word is used. Also, like Exodus 1:8. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Right. And so that's a relational aspect. But what it says is, now I know that you fear me.
So I don't, you know, I don't know that just necessarily, because my Hebrew is, but
it's rough.
Syntax doesn't always change the word, because you can't always just say, well, the syntax here is a little bit different, so that therefore now the word meaning is different. I mean, it's all there's so few words in Hebrew anyway. So I mean, I don't know that you can just make a syntactical argument for a word argument when the context itself is the subject of the debate. So
can I interject a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Just a question for clarity for us dumb folks that need to kind of catch up with you philosopher-minded folks. Help to understand this. Okay, so like I think of middle knowledge in some of these questions, with even Tim, you and Warren, others acknowledging that God knows all possible contingencies. And so you're not saying that God doesn't know that Abraham could fear him.
Correct.
You're saying that he has that knowledge. So even that is not like what we would say, now I know, so-and-so fears me, now I know that, that guy fears me because he did this thing, because I had no idea of the possible contingencies of what would have happened. It actually, I'm learning like a human being would be learning. You're not trying to say God's doing that. You're saying instead that God is affirming in the experience that of the possible things that he could do, that he has chosen to fear, that he has chosen that path. Is that correct? Is that an accurate way of understanding it?
I'll put this forward in two stages. I like the way that you framed that. Again, there's just slight nuances. But the first thing that I would state is that the plain reading, the face value reading of the text is that God is gaining information. That's how the phrase is written. If it were written of a human, we would say that the human is gaining information. So there's almost like I have a special pleading question about, we have to look at this text as it's written. If there is a good reason to not take the text as written, that would be where we would start to look at, okay, maybe it's a different kind of knowledge. Maybe it's experiential knowledge. Dr. White took it into the direction of, well, let's ignore that and talk about Abraham and Isaac getting changed. So no one reads the Bible in a actually wooden literal sense. We're all trying to do hermeneutics. We're all trying to do interpretation. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, it sounds like what it says. And if I don't think that it means what it says, I need to have a very, very good reason for taking it away from the plain meanings. That's the first thing I would think of. The second thing is that, yes, the way that I would cash this out in my version of an open view, again, it's a big umbrella. It's a big tent for better or worse. I think I got knocked on that for a couple of things too. But when I'm thinking about big tent, like my view, my perspective on this is that God knows, probably with even like percentage likelihood chances, that Abraham can pass the test or Abraham can fail the test. And he's chosen Abraham in this moment to partner with him. And he's working on Abraham's character. And that, I think, is the reason for the test. Here's another issue I have with Calvinism, Arminianism, and Molinism.
Hey, real quick,
I
pause.
think that it makes
Thanks.
the test sure.
Real pause, Tim. Thanks, GMW, for the super chat. I do see your Twitter DM group, and I will interact one day. All right, sorry, go Tim.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Yeah, and keep supporting the channel. These guys deserve it. But so I think that any of these views in which there is, as Alan Rhoda points out, a unique actual future, I think it makes it very difficult to explain the purpose of the test in the first place, especially if the purpose of the test is for God to have proof that this person's going to do what he asks them to do. So the test is not framed as something that is for Abraham's benefit or for Abraham to know and pass the test. And now Abraham understands. It's a narratival fulcrum point in the story where something happens in the story where God is wanting to put someone to the test. And if they pass, the implications are, then this person will be the kind of person I can partner with on an ongoing basis. And if they fail the test, it'll be kind of like, well, then this person has proven themselves untrustworthy and I need to go in a different direction.
So,
right?
And forgive me for pushing on this, but it's just like, so the thing with Peter denying Christ 3 times before the rooster crows, some may see that as some kind of a test, that he didn't present it as a test, but he just tells him this is what you're going to do. How does that relate to the same kind of a situation? Because obviously Jesus knew with some level of certainty what Peter would do even before a rooster crowed, whereas you seem to be saying that God did not know with that kind of certainty that Abraham would pass the test.
So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the text is saying that. Okay. But yeah, when I think about the concept of a test, I agree that it's that passage in the Gospels, wherever it occurs in the Synoptics and in John, that's not framed as a test. Another passage that is framed as a test is in the Garden of Eden with the fruit, right? It is framed almost as a test. And there was clearly what God wanted was for them to pass that test by not partaking of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But they failed that test. And then there were consequences that followed along on the other side of that test. There's a motif that occurs often on the pages of Scripture where there are tests that are placed in front of people where, I even think of Moses's line of choose life, right? Today is set before you life and death. Choose life. And unfortunately, we know from the rest of Jewish history that most of the time they did not choose life. They chose death. So people are given a set of doors they can walk through, the obedience to God door or the disobedience to God door. And God lays it in front of them. And he genuinely hopes that they'll choose one or the other. You can't hope for something you already kind of know that it's going to happen and how it's going to turn out. Again, you might press on that too. But I think that it's very difficult for me to understand even the purpose of a test on the pages of Scripture. The way that they're presented is that God is placing a test to prove that this person is going to like obey him or disobey him, and understand what kind of the nature of that person's character is, and whether or not they're going to be a reliable partner for him in the future. I think Saul is tested and fails the test, and then the kingdom is taken from him and handed to David. So this motif of tests doesn't make sense to me. If there is a unique actual future that God knows what will happen, it makes more sense to me to be able to say the test exists to find faithful partners that God's going to work with. And the test is to say, okay, well, there's a possibility I think it's a remote possibility that this person will fail, right? But I need to prove this out so that I can see, is this person going to pass the test and be someone that can be a faithful partner of mine?
Let's back this up just a second, Tim. I'm sorry, Leighton, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I have a lot more questions and a couple of things to push back on, but I'll defer to Johnathan, because I know I'd like to hear his experiential arguments.
Well, I was going to actually
what you're saying too. Yeah,
I was going to push on that. So, just in principle. So the question here, we're kind of getting at: would Jonathan's experiential answer work in the case of Abraham and Isaac? Okay, that's fair, and the response back is to say, well, no, because here it's actually telling us that God now has this propositional awareness. Okay, Johnathan can speak to that if he wants to, but in principle, Tim, do you think there are passages that move would work on, or would you still say, no, that's still a gaining of some kind of knowledge that necessitates something like dynamic omniscience?
Yeah, I wouldn't say blanket statement that it's impossible. It would have to be taken.
Well, let me give you an example.
With good
so God sees something happen from our perspective that he absolutely knew would happen in precisely the way down to the molecule that it would happen. All right. But he reacts in anger. You know, we could say, well, yeah, he may have known propositionally everything, but when he has the experience of it, he will have the anger phenomenon that he knew he would have. But it's legitimate because it's in the moment, because he has experiential knowledge here. Now, could someone say that according to you and still be someone who affirms exhaustive, not dynamic omniscience, some other view?
So let me see if I can understand. If someone holds the view that you just espoused, it sounded like I might have misunderstood, but it sounded like you were saying, if someone holds the view that you espoused, would they hold the view that you espoused? And my answer would, of course, be yes. I might have misunderstood.
No, I'm saying if someone believed that God would be reacting out of his experiential knowledge, but he had all propositional knowledge, would you think, I realize that you're saying if someone held that view, would they hold that view? But I'm saying, would that then, would you say that's enough to qualify you as a dynamic omniscience advocate if you say that?
I wouldn't, specifically because of the alethically open future dynamic of this, where the future needs to be in some way epistemologically or epistemically open to God and alethically open to God in some form in order for it to be considered a dynamic view, right?
And
knowing possibilities is one version
of
that.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But alethically, what you mean for the audience is that there's some actual truth value to those future events.
Correct. Relating,
because if there's not a truth value at all, then to say that God doesn't know it, you could still say God knows everything that possibly could be known. It's just that that's not a thing, right? It's
not true yet, right?
Yeah.
What will be true has not yet come to pass.
Okay, so here's the question.
The truth maker of it, this is like J.P. Moreland's correspondence theory of truth, right? What is true is that which corresponds to reality, and the future is not a reality yet.
Okay, let me ask you this question then. So if I said tomorrow Johnathan Pritchett is going to play baseball, and even though that is shockingly unlikely, if he ends up doing that, the question becomes, was I right? Did I say something true?
You made a prognostication about what you thought would be true that actualized in the moment when it happened. So if I said to my kids, we're going to go to Six Flags tomorrow, and that's our plan. We have a plan to go down to Denver and go to Elitch's, as it's called out here. And we're going to go and get on a bunch of rides. And I say that that's the plan. Then it's open whether that will be true or not true. Any number of things could happen between now and then that could derail my statement, right? Where we could get a flat tire on the way down and get into a horrible car accident, God forbid. Elitch's could be the entire amusement park could be the subject of a firebombing arson attack by a bunch of militant atheists or something. I don't know. It could happen, right? But it's not true. Again, now this is different from God's experience of things, right? We're talking in human language, and so it's not a one-to-one. But my contention is that the future is not a real thing yet, that it becomes real and true when there is a correspondent reality, I would contend, in a present moment that makes a past statement.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but let me back up and just ask it flatly again. If we say tomorrow Johnathan will play baseball. I think from your perspective, if I'm understanding you, you're going to have to say, no, that's actually not true. Even if it obtains, that's actually not true in the moment. It becomes true later on. And we may even colloquially speak as though, hey, you were right yesterday. That was true when you said that. But you are committed to saying, and I don't think this is a small thing, you're committed to saying that if we say X is going to happen tomorrow and it does happen, it still wasn't true when we said that it would happen tomorrow. Would you say that's correct?
I would affirm that. Yeah. The first passage that comes to mind is in James when he says, you should not say tomorrow we'll go to such and such town and work and make such and such amount of money. You should say, if the Lord wills. If the Lord wills, we'll go tomorrow and we'll do this and that. So this is a discussion. I agree with essentially how you're framing it, that a statement about a future possibility is not in the moment true. It's proven to be an accurate prognostication when the thing about which the portention was being declared becomes true in that future moment when it becomes present.
Okay, now next step to that, Tim. So if God says, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, even though it's God who knows it's God who's going to do it, it's in the future and the future doesn't exist yet. So are God's words not true when he says them?
I would never say that anything that God says is not true. I would say that the truth value is not yet set. It's not as though it's true or false. It's that the truth value is not yet set. Okay. And the reason I would say that is that also in the pages of scripture, God, we know God cannot lie. Okay. We know that from Hebrews and other places, right? But we also know that God makes statements about the future that don't come to pass. Okay. So he says, through the mouth of Isaiah, I brought this up in the debate. He says, through the mouth of Isaiah to Hezekiah, get your affairs in order. You are going to die. You will not recover. And then minutes later, Hezekiah, apparently not taking this as a settled matter that is it's a feature of a unique actual future that is unchanging, turns to the wall and prays. And then God turns from a clear statement about what will happen in the future and then grants him 15 more years. Right. Mm-hmm. So he makes a statement in the moment about his future intention, right? Or a feature of the future from his perspective, what he is going to bring about or what is going to happen. And it's not true or false yet, but it's a prognostication of what's coming. And then the prognostication changes based on Hezekiah's prayer. So it wasn't true or false in the moment. If he had said, you absolutely will, then he was making a statement that I think would have been proven false later. But I don't think that's what happened.
Yeah, now I don't mean to keep pushing, but just for entertainment value.
I don't mind the pushing. Keep pushing. This is fine.
Okay, good, because I think we understand each other and we like each other and all that. But so you're describing a situation where it well may be the case, and probably is the case, that God is saying this for the intention and expectation that he might change the mind of the hearer so that he functions differently, and this doesn't obtain. But if God were to say, regardless of whatever happens, this is not a Jonah situation, like we were able to corner God about this and ask him, and he were to say, yes, it absolutely is going to be the case that tomorrow you'll be on a live stream with Johnathan Pritchett, Leighton Flowers, and Braxton Hunter. And you're like, really? Like, that's really the case? Yeah, that's really the case. And it is going to obtain, and it does obtain. But when God said it, it was not necessarily true. It just was a statement about the future.
Now, I will say there's a version of this I can affirm, that I can agree with. But I also think that there is a very real sense in which God, being God, having the power that God has, the omnipotence that God has, the ability to bring about his plans with specificity if he so chooses, there is certainly a version of that where I would say, look, if God says it's going to happen, who's going to borrow Dr. White's critique that he thought would land and didn't, because it's not what I believe, who's going to strike at his hand and say, what have you done? If God decides to bring something about ahead of time, and ahead of time doesn't mean in eternity past, it means before the thing comes about, there's no one who can stop him from bringing that about. So if God says that it will happen, and then it comes to pass and it happens, then God was proving himself right. He was making a statement about what would come, and it was true. I think of this is a lot of what goes into the discussion in the Isaiah 40 through 48 passage. That's what I think God is doing. He's making a power claim of his ability to say, this is what's going to happen ahead of time, and then he brings it about by his power in a future moment.
Okay.
Right.
So there are people.
God can't lie. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah. So there are people in the chat pointing out that this is now becoming an open theist debate between me and you, rather than
a discussion.
A response to the debate, and we want to do that. Last thing I'll ask you on that regard, or say, and then you can comment, is it sounds to me like what you would have to say there, and maybe I think if I was in your spot, I would think this was okay to say, but you would have to say, no. Even with all God's certainty about his own power and stuff, still statements about the future have no truth makers. And so the fact of the matter is, what God is conveying there is, it is God's every intention, and he knows that he's capable of doing it, to bring this about in the future.
I think that's fair. Sure. The God never says anything false. Okay. He's not ever going to say anything false. It's contrary to his nature and his character, but he can say things that are true, that are present statements, past statements, or even future statements that he's going to prove true. Okay. You may even be able to say, it is true that this is my current intention, right? Or I will do this. I plan to do this. I thought I would do this. Those are true statements about that. I thought especially is kind of a past statement. Again, our conversations around time get really hairy, really, really fast, but I broadly affirm what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah, that could be.
Well, you're going to hell.
Yeah, that that can be easily explained just by, instead of appealing to mysterious versus prescriptive wills. That's just normal way of willing, as far as antecedent and consequent will. Because antecedently, I can, if my kid takes the cookie out of the cookie jar, I am going to, write a strongly worded tweet, but to my kid. But if it turns out he doesn't, then consequently, I'm not going to do that because he didn't do the thing, or he changed his mind or stopped himself from doing the thing that would have led to a harshly worded Facebook post. So God can say, I'm going to bring disaster because he intends to, but his consequent will is, if they repent, then I won't. And that's just how willing works. But I think before we move on, though, and I know that you and I want to go at it probably a little bit more about my view of experiential versus propositional. But one thing that you and I can both unite on is, even though Dr. White never said this word in the debate, Pastor Dano Roman says, now I know it's simply an anthropomorphic, or more technically, Dano, it's anthropopathic, because
anthropopathic.
Yeah. But since God can't ever learn anything, well, the latter half begs the question that we're all talking about here. I agree with you in principle, but this text, there is no. So let me give you an example of like anthropomorphism. When in the New Testament, they're preaching to mostly Jewish audiences. This goes back to the Greek versus Hebrew thing. Why it's important. You will hear Stephen say that he sits at the right hand of God to Jewish audiences, and they know what that means. Notice no one ever says it to Greek audiences, because a Greek would think, so Yahweh has a right hand. Because Zeus has a right hand. And all the gods have right hands. And so that would be like they're intentionally avoiding anthropomorphic language with certain audiences because of the context, right? Yeah. It's different between Hebrew
form
audiences.
Or shape. So it's literally man-shaped language, but anthropopathic is man-like thoughts language.
Right. And so he would be speaking anthropopathic. The problem with that there is that there's nothing in the text to give us that, which is why I reject that kind of thing, and I find a different way to explain it. And then Tim says he rejects that kind of thing and says God had no clue, propositionally, experimentally, nothing. Not no clue, but
clue.
I'm being facetious there. But I'm saying he would say,
yeah,
God had no certainty, which is why he now knows. And I would say God knew propositionally, but now he knows experientially and relationally. And I think no does help me out there. But you don't. We get into that all day long. But the point is, and I think the reason why is anytime someone says anthropomorphism or anthropopathism, when dealing with a biblical text, is what you did is you explained nothing. You told us what the text must be because of this other thing you believe. But that doesn't give us an explanation of the text. It gives us this other thing that you already believe that we're debating about. So you have to give us what the text means, not say it has to mean this because I believe this other thing, when that's the subject. This other thing is the subject of the debate, because that's just begging the question.
It's begging the question. Right.
And we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We want to show, how does it communicate anthropomorphically or anthropopathically, if that's what it's doing? What is it communicating to us? What it can't be communicating is, I already know, because it's not what it says. It's the exact opposite of what it says. So you have to deal with what it says, not with what you think it means, without explaining what it actually says. Because as Tim pointed out in the debate, Tim's even all on board with telling us what it means, as long as you explain what it actually says. You agree with that? I mean, you're like, I tell you what I think it means because of what it says.
What does the text sustain is the constant question.
Yeah. And that was kind of my enjoyment, where even though I kind of, agree with Dr. White in principle that propositionally God knew that, you can't go to it changed them without saying, well, what about what God says about himself? Because that's the key here. And so you have to offer an explanation for what the text says. Right. Get to the next video. I hear you. See, but I want to point out that Braxton did shut up our guest for $1.99. How much more would he shut me up for even more money? So keep that in mind. Here we go.
Evil. Did God know when he created that the Holocaust would take place? Yes or no? I'm going to be asking that question. True open theism says no. True open theism says God did not even know that you would exist. He couldn't, because God cannot know the actions of free creatures. Okay? Now, we may have some, mutant form of open theism. I don't know, because people keep changing it this way, that, or the other. But what you need to understand is, if you take this perspective that says, God determined these things were going to happen, that's terrible. If Ephesians 1 is correct, and I'm going to assume that it is, that he has done everything that he has done, that he works all things according to the counsel of his will to the praise of his glorious grace, then we are going to see on that great day the absolute justice of God in his creation. And we are going to see the purpose in every bit of evil. Otherwise, let's think about what the other side says. If you don't have a divine decree, then you have a God that created this universe. And either he didn't know all the evil was going to happen, or he didn't have a purpose for it. So he said, yeah, boy, there's some bad stuff's going to happen, but that's the best I can do. Best I can do. And if he didn't know, but he knew he was creating the potentiality for it, what do you think about someone who creates the potentiality of all this evil, but has no purpose in it? No reason in it.
So on the one hand, what you have here is
a false dilemma.
Let's just take the dilemma as he's presented it, because I think it blows up in his face.
Right.
Let's take it with any straw manning that may or may not be there. So on the one hand, this results in God actualizing a world, and he doesn't necessarily have ahead of time a plan for these evil things. Now, he could have a redemptive purpose for these things on dynamic omniscience, because he knows every possible branching off timeline, and he knows how he would react in every one of those timelines. So he can have a redemptive purpose. But let's just grant it. Let's just say, no. There's no redemptive purpose. There's nothing. There's some things just happen that are just bad. That's one side. The other side is God determines and I'm going to use internet popular terminology to avoid TOS. He wants grape. He wants PDF files. He wants all of those kinds of things, because ultimately this is like theodicy of the gaps. Somewhere down the line in the future, we'll see how it all worked out the way, perfectly or something. I still think between those two, this one over here, the open theist perspective as he presented it, would still be the favorable of those two not great situations, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. You probably saw me cringing, genuinely cringing. Again, any person formulating a sentence in which it's possible to equate the Holocaust with justice of God is just shocking to me. And I He probably didn't mean it that way. I really, again, I don't want to go so far as to say that that's what he thought, but my goodness, I could not believe some of the things that came out of his mouth, and that was a whopper.
Pause. Roy, thank you for that super chat. That's a substantial super chat. 90% of physicists, he says, do not believe time exists on the fundamental level. When you listen to them say in time, you are listening to people who do not know what they are talking about. Time does not exist on the fundamental level. I would like to go back to the Phil papers on that and see what the actual numbers are on philosophy of time. But anyway, go ahead with your response, and thank you for that super chat.
Yeah, thank you for that. He's 100% right. I don't have the statistics to quote 90%, but he's right that
I'm going to find him.
Significant number of physicists don't think of time as a thing so much as a property, but that's a different discussion. In any case, I'm sorry because I'm so incensed that I'm having a little bit of a hard time knowing what to respond to. There's so much going on there that I just can't fathom that he said. So maybe you can help me by understanding what you'd specifically like a response about.
Well, let me jump in real quick. One, I would say his comment about being a mutant form of open theism is just a hypocrisy upon hypocrisy. There are so many different formulations of Calvinism, and so therefore to say by that logic, any form of Calvinism that's not the Calvinistic kind of Calvinism must be called a mutant form of Calvinism.
You could say that about Arminianism and even Predestination and Molinism. They're all there's a spectrum for all of these. That was
correct, and that's why you've got to prepare for the person that you're debating, not for the person you debated last time that held to a similar perspective or something like that. And so that was the first really mistake that I kind of saw you kind of cringe at. It's kind of like, what do you know, obviously everybody has different views, and then the other that I was going to point out just ran out of my brain, but comment on that if you will, Tim, because how much different really is your views than maybe the guy he debated last time with regard to open theism?
So the two people I know he debated who are part of the openness camp were John Sanders, who coined the term dynamic omniscience, by the way, and Bob Enyart. And I believe the Sanders debate was first and the Bob Enyart was second. And Bob Enyart he was a pastor at a church out here in Denver, passed away a couple of years ago due to COVID. Both debates were very instructive. They took sort of a very different approach. Again, openness is it's not a monolith. And really, I think you guys might be gratified to hear this. I think that the view that has probably the most consistent set of assumptions that most people who hold the view tend to hold the largest Venn diagram of agreement is probably Molinism, actually, because frankly, it's a pretty internally coherent system. If I weren't an open theist, I'd be a Molinist. But it's a large set of assumptions. But yeah, Calvinism has infralapsarians and supralapsarians. It has more hard determinists. It has more compatibilist articulations. It has folks who are really more Augustinian in everything, and then it has more folks who sort of take on the viewpoint of later reformers after Augustine and don't necessarily, it's got Credo Baptists and Paedo Baptists who are kind of all under that same umbrella of Calvinist or Reformed or Augustinian assumptions. So yeah, it's just empty rhetoric. If the charge is levied back to you and it's just as strong a charge against you as it is your opponent, it's empty rhetoric. There's no reason
because a lot of times the rhetoric is used as okay, well, I believe that the future is open. Well, I'm not an open theist, and I believe that, and because I don't believe that God's knowledge of the future determines it, and because I don't relate to knowledge with which causal. And so that may be a philosophical difference that some people just can't accept, or they say, well, if it's known by God, then it is set, and therefore it can't be free. And I don't accept that philosophical conclusion. I think something can be known and still be free. So I'm still free to choose the choices that I make in the future. But just because God knows those future free choices doesn't mean it's preset or it's not free. And so does that make sense? I mean, that's one of the things that I get into trouble with, because I'll just affirm what, Warren or somebody says when they says, oh, I don't believe in a fixed future. I believe it's a free future. And I'm just going, amen. And I agree. But I don't believe because God knows something makes it fixed or determined.
It's fascinating. So the way that you frame that up is really, really interesting, because we all would agree that it's not God's knowledge that is causative, right? It's not that
Good.
God knows something that causes it to be that truth value in the future. But when you said that you don't believe that it's preset, I actually think you do believe that it's preset, because you simply, if God knows that it will transpire this way, then it will transpire this way, and there's a 0% chance of anything else actually happening. So in that sense, the future isn't alethically open on your view, or on the Arminian view, or on the Calvinist view. The truth statements about what will transpire in the future are true apart from the events themselves transpiring in this view, right? So there's a sense in which it is preset, but it wasn't determined, and God's knowing it isn't causative. But that is the exact reason why I don't think that it makes sense to be saying that if we're, again, I'm a JP Moreland correspondence theory of truth guy, where it's the truth maker of that event is what makes it true. And it only comes true in the present moment, where it passes from a possibility to a reality. And that's where I would.
Isn't that where, William Lane Craig and others would talk about the conflating of certainty with necessity? That something is certainly known doesn't mean it's necessitated, determined.
They would push back on that. Yes, that they would push back on that, and they would kind of use those terms. I just don't think that I don't find those criticisms coherent. I don't find that if it is, again, if it is 100% true, what will happen on this date at this time to this person, and that's true apart from the time of the thing actually happening.
The reason it's true is not because he knows it. You've already confirmed that.
Correct.
That the reason it's true is not because he knows it. The reason it's true is because of the free choices that led to that event. And that's enough for me to say that the future is not set, because the reason he knows it is based upon, the knowledge is based upon the fact that the free creatures made the choices to get to that point. And God knows it not because he determined it, but because he is all-knowing and he sees all things, which is beyond our full comprehension. It's supernatural. Maybe we just can't relate to each other on that as far as the way our brains work or whatever it is, but I just don't see it as a problem theologically.
This is an interesting thing for me. Yeah, this is the thing for me when I think about middle knowledge. Okay, again, used to be a Molinist.
Wait, real quick before you answer that, I hate to always do it on you, Tim, but you're the one having to talk the most, and I keep waiting for you guys to get to a moment. I wanted to say to Ben, thank you for that super chat. I'm new to this debate, but how does open theism change our interpretation of Scripture compared to Molinism or closed theism? What is the effect? I'll go ahead and answer that real quick and see if you agree, Tim, so you can get right back to your point. I would just say that it changes our understanding of passages in the Bible where it at least seems on a surface reading that God doesn't know something, or God gains knowledge, like with the Abraham and Isaac situation, where he says, now I know about Abraham's obedience to him. So it would change your interpretation of those passages, where most other people would say in the most difficult of those passages that it's an anthropomorphism or something like that. But I didn't want to interrupt what you were saying. Go right ahead, Tim.
Yeah, no. And to give my own response to that, that's generally true. It allows us to take at face value passages that say that God was frustrated by something that he sought to find. He went on a search to find something that he was unable to find, like in Ezekiel, right? Or that he, when he says, now I know this or that thing, or when he says, what more could I have done? He did all these things hoping that the Israelites would turn from their, again, the word I used was whoring themselves after other gods. He set them up, the passage about like the vine dresser, where if God is doing all of this, hoping for a particular outcome that he does not get, it allows us to take that at face value, that he's sad about an outcome that he had hoped would go differently. So that I would say is probably the main interpretive difference, is that if you don't hold to an open view, you would essentially have to find a way to explain those in a different way than how they read, I would contend, naturally. But hopefully that answers the question too.
I think that was good. Molinism. Back to your issue.
Molinism.
Yeah. So Molinism. Okay. Being a former Molinist myself, there's a version of this that I think like a Greg Boyd would probably affirm. I don't like everything that Greg Boyd has said. I don't agree with everything Greg Boyd teaches, but he was very helpful in articulating this concept of like a neo-molinism, where Molinism assumes that given enough data, it's all these subjunctive counterfactuals. Again, I have William Lane Craig in my mind every time I use the phrase subjunctive counterfactuals, where it's if this, and the this is a list of inputs and antecedent conditions, then this, and the this is what will happen, or if this, then that. This is all these antecedent conditions and inputs. That is what will happen. And there is a 100% certainty this is what's coming, given all this information we have.
Yes.
Right? So if that's the case, there's a version of determinism where the definition is all things are explicable and are arise from or are outflows of antecedent conditions.
Well, wait a minute. So I said yes, but I don't think I should have, because you were describing.
You shouldn't say yes about that, right?
Yeah, you're describing.
You probably would disagree.
Yeah, you're describing that if God knows, it's because there are antecedent conditions that he can see will lead to X, Y, and Z choice. Whereas what I want to say is God just knows.
Right. And the antecedent, okay, that's interesting. You want to say God just knows. Regardless.
Now, let me give you a parallel to this.
Mm-hmm.
So like if I asked you, like, well, did God create the physical universe? You would how would you answer that? You'd probably say yes, right?
Of course, yes.
Okay, you'd say God created the physical universe, and I'd say, okay, so there was nothing, and then there was something. Well, where did that something come from? How did he create? What's the grounding for that something? Like from what did it arise? And you would struggle to answer that question, I think. You would ultimately have to say, well, God's just able to do that. God just can do that. And I would say
that's exactly how we answer
God's
the question. Knowledge. Yeah, that's exactly the way we would reply to how God knows. We don't
how
know.
Would you react?
I can't explain how he creates something from nothing any more than I can explain how he knows the future free choices. I just believe that he does. And I accept the mystery of it.
And those are different
I would push back
categories,
saying
obviously.
that God is clearly portrayed as doing this thing on the pages of Scripture, but then there are passages, and not just one or two, but lots of them that cause me to question whether he can do that thing that we're punting to mystery on, right? That it's the way that the passage naturally reads to me, and I will be fair and say that this is my interpretation and all of that, and we can't have 100% certainty on any of this, but the way that it seems to me is when I read those passages, it seems to be the Scriptures denying that God has the ability to do that in every instance. Again,
so in the garden, when he says, "Where are you?" do you take that to mean he really doesn't know where they are?
No, I take that to be a known answer question, right? We have that whole concept as well. Not everything is like that.
Can there be the same idiomatic use for the messenger of God, not God himself, but it's actually the angel that says, "Now I know," like we the triune Godhead, all of creation, everybody knows now what you're doing because it's been proven publicly because of what you did. Now we know, and that be an idiomatic statement, not of denying that God had, even in your view, he had the knowledge of what could happen. So he's not learning anything in the way a human would learn it. So that you could say the basic human reading is that he had no idea, because that's the basic human reading of it. But even you guys don't affirm that. Even you affirm he knows all those possible contingencies. So even you are stretching the actual meaning of the text in some way to fit in your open theistic views, right?
Bam.
Right. Now, what's happening here, and this is great. I love the back and forth. There's a couple of things that were interesting in that. First thing is, do you think that the angel of the Lord is distinct from the Lord in some way?
No, he's a messenger of the Lord, and he even ends with saying "me." That you know. So he's referring back to he's speaking for God. But remember that the angelic, host of heaven, even the triune God refers to him in the plural of "we," even though it uses the personal pronoun "I" there. It still could be idiomatic of, in my estimation, of just kind of saying, now it's been proven, now it's shown who you are and what you believe, that your faith has been demonstrated. And so, I don't think it goes enough. It's more of a relational kind of conversation, and I don't think it goes far enough to prove a theological point with regard to the knowledge of God.
Well, let me just give a couple of examples. Yeah, I do know what you're saying, and I do hear where you're coming from, and I want to get to those implications eventually, but I kind of want to solve this question first. So, for example, like in Exodus 3, past 1 through 6, it's the burning bush. The text says it's the angel of the Lord there talking to Abraham. Or not talking to Abraham, talking to Moses. And then Moses is talking back as though he's talking to Yahweh. And then it's an interaction where now it's God speaking, right? That it introduces the angel of the Lord is appearing to Moses. And then the rest of the passage is him talking to the same character that's introduced in the first 6 verses of Exodus.
Well, the word angel
as if it's
literally
God.
means messenger. Yeah, it's a messenger of God.
Sure.
So he's speaking on behalf of God, and I have no problem with that.
Okay.
And even with Jesus, Jesus speaks on behalf of God, obviously, but yet there's examples of where Jesus in the flesh, incarnate, may not have had knowledge of future things like the coming of Christ, the return of Christ. And so there could be some element there of where a messenger in time, if you want to use this terminology or however people want to say that, because people get all over people and say in time, but in the context of a dynamic conversation with a person, saying now we know, I just don't think it necessarily speaks to our debate or our question with regard to God's
I
knowledge.
know I'm not the only one who drags this conversation so far back.
I've got one last thing.
Clip than
I've got one
the
last
present
thing.
clip.
Wait, before,
thing
okay,
here.
say your thing, Tim, and then I'm going to go
Yes.
back to a super chat. Go ahead.
Not Genesis, Judges 6. Okay, this is 11 through 14. I will not read the whole thing. I'll just read 11 and then I'll read 14. Judges 6:11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from Midianites. So the angel of the Lord comes and talks to Gideon. Verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" So there's no change in conversation there. I think that the angel of the Lord is like a manifest presence of the Lord in the moment. I don't think that it's necessarily just a messenger. When we say messenger, angelos is the Greek word, and we're kind of importing that back into the Old Testament to say angel. So there's some weirdness there. But when I read that, I think it's a manifestation of God sent to speak to someone. I don't think it's something it's distinct from God, but it's also definitely God himself, and it's not just someone speaking for him. That would be my contention.
I don't think that matters either way with regard to the point I was making, but I can concede that without a problem.
Super chat.
Well, before we get to the super chat, I just want to say, since we're in the book of Judges 16:16 is a very inspirational verse that says, "With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it." And I just, there's not many passages about nagging. I just thought that might be a blessing to someone. Roy says, and thank you for that substantial super chat, we exist in matter. Time is the measurement of matter in motion. That's it. For in him we live and move and have our being. We view time a certain way because we have minds that record. We haven't moved in time. Matter moves. So let me just jump in here really quick and give a slight philosophical thought on this, despite how complex it may or may not be. I've done a lot of thinking about time, and I know that I think it's called the Cambridge School that says that, and it's made up of a couple or three really prominent Christian philosophers that say something like, well, the issue is time is kind of a construct. And like we came up with our understanding of seconds and minutes and hours. But if you had God, let's say a classical understanding of God, except on this one point, there would be no time. It would be timeless in the sense that God is not moving. There's no progression of thought because he has all knowledge and all those kind of things. And so there would be no time in that sense, but it would actually be the same state of affairs as we have right now because time is just a construct. And Craig's response to that, I think, is compelling. It's to say something like, you're right that seconds, minutes, and hours are durations of time that we have set out artificially for our use, but they seem to be measuring something. A second isn't an hour. It seems like there is something real, metaphysically real underneath that we're tracking. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I just think of time as sequence. Yeah, I just think of time as sequence, right? And I actually really like the way that Roy is framing this, because again, if we're being consistent in terms of like presentism or eternalism, and then A theory versus B theory, because those are kind of coterminous. That's what those mean, right? If we're consistent presentists, if the present is all that exists, then the past is just an accurate record of past presence, right?
Right.
And statements about the future are statements about what we anticipate to transpire in future presents. But the existence of time is just the existence of sequential things. So I don't affirm things like logical moments. I don't think that they make a lot of sense. It's a it seems to me to be so much special pleading to avoid realistic time.
I
right?
was,
And this
yes,
is just my
until you got
stance.
there. I was kind of agreeing because I'm really sympathetic to President, because when is it not ever now, always. But I mean, it's like I'm sympathetic to that, but I logical moments still can make sense in that context. But yeah, I mean, it's like time is what I would say to Craig on that, Braxton, would be if I was, I'm not committed to this, it's just kind of leanings. It's like me on Hill and me on idealism. I lean that way. And so I would just say, yeah, this is a way.
Idealism. Oh, interesting.
Time is a way that I watch myself get older. So I see the decay and track it every day, but I'm still in the present, right? So it's, when I say matter and motion, it's a way to track change. But even people who affirm time, so these physicists would have to say, okay, an interstellar where it seems like they're gone for an hour, but they come back and it's 50. All that's, physicists don't really believe.
Yeah,
that
what's up with that,
Yeah,
Tim?
No.
Because those seconds and minutes and stuff, if that's the way, they're not going to, duration doesn't change relative to gravitational pulls unless you affirm that time is real. And if physicists don't believe that time is real, then that could never happen. It's always just going to be now for both parties at the same time and whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Measurement of time is different from ontology of time, right?
Right.
So the way we measure time is very, very, very different. When I think of time, again, for the logical moments thing, let's go to eternity past. If we're all Trinitarians, you guys are Trinity Radio for crying out loud, right? So if we're all Trinitarians, then we would affirm something, hopefully we would all affirm something along the lines of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit have been eternally coexistent in a relationship of love, right? We would probably agree with a statement something like that. So if
I
there was
would have
ever
a
a
problem
moment,
if you didn't.
right? Yes, right. Okay, I agree.
And what we mean by that, Tim, is wherever there is time, that is true. That existence is true, but it also transcends time.
Now, when you say transcends time, what do you mean by that?
Exists in a timeless state.
So, okay, so in a timeless state, could the Father express love to the Son, and then the Son sequentially reciprocate love back to the Father, or is that not possible in a
I think that's possible. Yeah, I think that's possible.
I think of that.
Well,
I think of that as time and sequence, but not measurement of time.
Well, the sequence thing would be the point of contention there, because, all right, I heard someone on the last stream or saw it in the chat, someone making fun of the notion that God doesn't think in a timeless state. And I think I agree with that, but I wouldn't phrase it like that. What is happening is, on classical theism, God does not have to think. When we're thinking through a series of things we already know to arrive at some new conclusion that we don't yet know. So, and I'm saying this as much for the audience as you, Tim. I know you know all this, but if God has the kind of omniscience that we think he has, it wouldn't even make any sense to say he's thinking through things to arrive at some new conclusion. So you do have kind of a static situation. And I would say the same with this expression of love. It's static and timeless, but then with humans, obviously it's different because we don't have that level of omniscience.
That's fair. Okay. Interesting. So let's come at it from a slightly different direction. For example, I'm going to lay out 3 what I consider moments, okay, in God's experience, and I want you to kind of tell me how you would cash these out. God has not yet decided. He's free to create or not to create. That's one moment, whether it's temporal or logical, right? Another moment, God has decided to create. Okay, there's actually.
Well, you just moved from logical to temporal.
It could be either logical or temporal. Okay, God has
logical.
Decided
there's no problem that I see.
Then God is creating, and then God has created. Is there could be some of them, like it's a mix of logical and temporal. Could be it's both logical and temporal. It could be only logical for some of these, temporal for some of these.
I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for Leighton and Johnathan, but I would go with this. It makes sense to me, Craig's view of this, because he uses the example of God is like a man sitting in a static state, but from the moment he moves to stand, instantly a timeline begins for the creation. But then, of course, God can't help but be aware of the creation. Yeah. So that's kind of how that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like a modified classical theism.
Yes, there could be a huge debate on it, but my thing on this is going back to the clip I just played.
Wait, before you go to that, Pritchett,
clips. I forgot there were clips.
Aaron said, thank you for that super chat. Says, I think the angel of the Lord in Judges 13, 17, and 18 is Jesus, specifically because the angel shares the name with the Messiah in Isaiah 9:6. By the way, I have to say, we talked about Heiser. Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, chapter, was it 2? One of the chapters is about the angel of the Lord, and it's one of the best treatments of the angel of the Lord I've seen.
Yeah, they're trying to turn this into a soteriology 101 gazillion hour long stream. But
you're welcome.
Everyone just let it go. The most important part of that clip was the idea that either evil has to be intended, because if it's not known, it has no purpose. And that is actually a very because all of us, none of us here that are decretalists, the way he said, dynamic omniscient. Well, we're not decretalists, but that statement is like the biggest false dilemma that just landed there. And I could smell the turd over the internet when I heard that, because it was like, it just sat there and I was like, wait a minute. God does not have to intentionally design that for it to have a purpose on, because even a Molinist could affirm that God didn't determine that for him to build in a purpose. And an open theist could say, now, wait a minute, God didn't even have to know about it in order to give it purpose at the or after the time. So both the open theist and the non-open theist who aren't a Calvinist would both say, wait a minute, that's a faulty. Either God knows and decrees and determines this evil to happen, or otherwise it has no purpose. And if he didn't know, it can't ever have a purpose. And I'm like, I'm not even an open theist, and I reject that faulty dilemma, because on our view, God cannot determine it to happen. He can know it'll happen and then build in a purpose into it. But go back to my debate with Leighton against Theodore and the other chipmunk.
Sonny.
I was like
Theodore and Sonny.
Sonny, yeah, thank you. Sonny, Theodore, and I don't know, Alvin Simon.
Is that Theodore Sicariades? Is that?
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself during that God is the redeemer of evil. He can usurp evil and redeem it, and he can do that in real time. Back to that conversation, since we're talking that way. But I mean, it's like, even as an open theist, I would sit there and think, no, God doesn't have to know it in order to give it purpose. Now, on the other hand, I would also say, even not as an open theist, and the self-loathing monolith that Braxton calls me, I was thinking, no, wait a minute. I think by that point, he already quoted Romans 8, 28 through 30, or 28 at least anyway. And I'm thinking to myself, now that is conditioned on those who love God anyway. So there could be evil instances that happen to God haters that not only has no purpose, but God has no intent to redeem. It's just, well, this bad thing happened. Of course it did, because y'all are horrible and y'all don't love me and you're not trying. So I'm like questioning three things. That even as a non-open theist, does all evil have to be purposeful? I don't know. I don't think anyone can know.
Evil's purpose is evil.
But whether you're an open theist or not, God can redeem any instance of evil for good. I mean, Genesis 50:20 and the Joseph. So I mean, from a non-Calvinist reading of those passages. So of course, God doesn't have to do the syndrome thing, make the evil in order to have create a purpose for the evil that he determined to occur in the first place for any of us. No view requires this, and that's a false. Anyway, I thought that
I agree.
Problematic.
I agree. For me, there's two things. I think that most Christians have a healthy intuition not to say God causes evil. Okay, that he wants evil, or that he purposed for evil to come about. But there is a healthy version. Again, there's some open theists or people that would be kind of under the like open and relational theology tent that say God kind of can't do anything about evil and doesn't do. And I think that that's bonkers too, and it doesn't do justice to the biblical text at all.
Right.
But evil, if you can grant that there are other wills and other powers at work in the universe that are in some way possessed of say-so ability to bring certain things about and to exercise their will which is lesser than God's, and their power, which is lesser than God's, to bring some kind of thing to pass through their intention and their action. That is where I locate evil. That it's on the actions of beings that aren't God, and their purpose is going to go contrary to God's purposes for things, right? Their purpose, again, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Christ comes so that people may have life and life to the full, right? But if it's stealing and killing and destroying, that's not something that God is doing through them. That's such a bizarre way of looking at it, and it wouldn't make it, even if it were God doing it, it wouldn't make those things just. It wouldn't make those things inherently justice oriented. God can bring justice upon those who do evil, right?
Yeah.
Or he can bring good outcomes and maybe even righteous outcomes out of evil that was intended to destroy.
Right.
But
without even
evil intended to destroy is wrong. And
right. Without
broken and
determining it.
sinful.
Because Dr. White would object to all of us non-Calvinist, non-open theists. He would say his thing, and I've heard him do this, where he's like, because he said it to on the grape recording, but he said it to non-open theists as well, who have brought up these objections to his theology. And he's like, if God doesn't decree it, it can't have a purpose. And by decree means deterministically bring about whatever. Okay, so I don't know anyone. I don't even know how that follows. Like, so if you're an open theist, it even more doesn't follow, because both of us are trapped. You and me, Tim, we're both trapped in that. If an instance of gratuitous evil, even every bit of evil that happens, God allows it because he's powerful enough to stop it if he didn't. So we all have to deal with the allow. But just because God allows evil, and whether he's going to repurpose it and gaming it out, infinite chess player Boyd way, or in the Molinist thing, or however you want to say that, God can use all of it. Yeah. So my objection to his is, I don't know how the Reformed theodicy of, well, God determined it, otherwise it's not purposeful. I don't know how that works, but I also don't know how it works to say, I don't think that I have the omniscience to say that God redeems or purposes, even if I was a Calvinist, that every single instance of evil is purposeful or even redeemed, because I don't know.
To be fair, most Calvinists don't go that far. I think that that's a consistent articulation of the view and its implications and entailments.
Right.
But they will reject that because they know that's a monstrous conclusion. So they will hold what I believe inconsistent Calvinism. And I'm really grateful for all the inconsistent Calvinists, because it's when you take it to its conclusions, and it's not slippery sloping it. It's just what is an entailment, and I think a straightforward face value implication of the view that you hold. If they hold that inconsistently, I'm grateful every time it happens. But I agree that it doesn't follow. And the other issue here, oh gosh, it's so baffling. But the other issue here is that if God is if he has to have a purpose for allowing all evil, then all evil is purposeful. Okay, evil. Here's what I would articulate. Sometimes God, when we look at evil occurring, it happens and it's not what he wanted. It's not what he wanted to transpire. He's upset about it. He expresses his displeasure, his frustration with it in the moment. What God does with that evil, he takes the fallout and the evil and the brokenness that creates, and then tries to create goodness and life in the lives of people who are hurting. We all know people who suffered horrible injustices that felt a special closeness to God walking through them in the process of going through injustice, where God was present to them in a unique way, helping them walk through it and heal them on the other side of it. And it can produce really beautiful souls, really beautiful human beings on the other side of great suffering, even really unjust suffering. Yeah. But that's not the same as God purposing the fact of the matter itself. It's him working in the aftermath. And then also he can bring justice on the perpetrator of the evil. Right. And those are two things God can do and repeatedly is depicted as doing on the pages.
And they may not even happen until Judgment Day, because I'm thinking of this thing, and I don't, I'm not trying to be impious. I know it's pious to say that God can purpose. The Calvinist is trying to sound pious. He's trying to say God purposes every evil so that he can get some sort of greater good out of it. Non-reformed theodicies say God can allow those evils because he has greater goods. But even as I fall within that camp, you know, and addressing the logical and the probabilistic problem of evil, I'm still saying to all Christians, there could be an instance of gratuitous evil where a cannibal gets, eats a child rapist, and nobody else on planet Earth knows that this thing happened, and it never affected anybody else. And to God, it's like, I just let that happen. I'm not going to do anything with that. Nobody knows about that. It's a thing that happened, and then somebody came and shot the cannibal. God's like, yeah, that's horrible, but these are all people that hate me, so I'm not going to try to bring some good butterfly effect that halfway around the world in 20 years to bring some sort of good. So God is going to be glorified in the punishment of these evildoers. That they were all evil. They were all doing evil to each other, but there doesn't have to be any greater purpose other than their judgment. I mean, there doesn't have to be something to God for good, because none of those people loved him, and all the people who do love God didn't even know about this situation in the first place. So I still want to push back even on our own side, which I can group open and say, let's not try to say that God must bring good out of every single instance of evil to make it purposeful, even if it looks purposeless, because sometimes there can just be purposeless evil, and there will be no greater good like justice until the last day. So we don't need to sit there and think that all of this, so.
But to borrow N.T. Wright's phrase, all will be put to rights. Will be put to rights, right, whether it is in this age or the next. It will be put to rights.
Exactly. So but I don't get this idea of, well, if God doesn't intend and purpose it in advance for this evil thing, for this great. No, I saw that line. God either knows or it can't have purpose. Well, it can have purpose. Even for the open theists said God didn't know with certainty that it was going to happen. So that didn't even follow.
Did we somewhere get back to the video, guys?
Yeah, well, that was actually the conversation we were supposed to have for that video. They went back to Abraham and Isaac. Anyway,
and
all I know is whatever is going on with these four guys on the screen right now, it's magic. People are loving it. So just keep doing whatever you're doing. But I will take $100 super chats to cut off Pritchett's mic.
Yeah, but you are the problem of evil guy, so you should have been saying what I was saying better than I said it.
I agree with whatever you said.
You didn't hear whatever I said.
I know what you think about the problem of evil.
Right. But do you think, okay, well, let me ask you, Braxton. I did say that I don't think God has to bring good out of every single instance of evil, and sometimes purposeless evil.
Yeah, I agree with that. The gratuitous evil thing, while I think there are answers to it, like I heard you guys talking about that a little bit. Like, for example, William Rowe in his famous article, the evidential problem of evil and some varieties of atheism, he actually presents two famous now examples. One is of a baby deer that a tree is struck by lightning and it falls over on the deer and it burns up and the deer burns up. And so there's no conceivable way theoretically that there could be any good that comes out of this. And he says, if you don't like that, there's obviously analogies we could think of that probably do take place. That would be enough like it. And then the other example was of a little girl who this guy comes home, the dad kills her, kills the mother, kills everyone, kills himself. And the idea is nothing good comes out of that. And the response that has come to that is like from William Weikstra, the Cornea response is to say something like, that's like looking in your backyard and saying, I don't see any worms out there, so there's no worms in my backyard. Isn't that amazing? And you say, well, yeah, but if there were worms in your backyard, we wouldn't expect you to be able to know just by glancing out the window. That's not how that works. And likewise, the things that God, the gratuitous, what seem like gratuitous evils for us, it could be that in a butterfly effect 100 years from now, some good comes out of that. So while I do think there are defenses for that claim, and I don't think that claim has as much purchase, even if it were the true that you found some gratuitous evils, that doesn't mess up my theology.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it doesn't have to be that butterfly effect at all. From the deer burns in the forest. Somehow in God's plan, he is going to work that for good in the butterfly effect. That doesn't even have to be the case. For me either.
This is the William Lane Craig difference between this is the William Lane Craig difference between the emotional problem of evil and the logical problem of evil, right?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of affinity for that view. I disagree with it, but I have a lot of affinity for that view.
Paul Helm makes those distinctions in The Many Faces of Evil. He's a Calvinist and has no problem using the word determinist, but he talks about in The Many Faces of Evil, there's an emotional problem and a logical problem. So, I mean, he makes that distinction as well. And that's a really good book if you want to read a Calvinist theodicy, because what I like about Paul Helm is, aside from not being scared of the word determinism, is that he acknowledges that he thinks that the free will defense of Plantinga works as a defeater, but he thinks he's dishonest as a Calvinist to use it for that purposes when he doesn't believe in it. And he believes that it's the onus is on him as a Reformed theologian with those convictions and a philosopher. He has to give an answer that's not just, I can get out of this borrowing from things I don't believe. I disagree with him on that. If you can get a defeater, use it. I don't have his convictions because that's why I don't have to shill for any team in an argument. But for Paul Helm, I do respect him for doing that because at least he's owning the fact that at the face of it, Reformed theodicy stinks. It really just does. Yeah. And it really gets you saying, love Dr. White with all my heart. Seriously messed up things like he said, just in framing this, God doesn't know or can't purpose. But you
love James White.
I do.
You respect James White.
Yes, I wish that
you have learned from James White.
Never travel by RV is what I've learned from all of his horror stories on that. Plus, I think it's causing him to ride his bicycle less. Love you, Dr. White. But I do admire him for getting back on the bike, which is something that the three of you, in terms of
stop it. Nobody cares.
I mean,
nobody cares. Yeah. All you're working out is just for other men.
It's for me. I want to live long time for my son and my wife, so that I don't
live long enough to play the next video clip. Go on.
I find it hilarious that this is where you guys got the most incensed throughout this entire conversation.
I do it to him.
Where I got the most incensed, or where Pritchett did.
We know what matters.
Where they got the most incensed at me.
Definitely practiced. Yeah.
Friends, as Christians in this room tonight, do we believe Romans 8:28? Do we believe that God works? Well, most things. Majority of things. Lots of things. Is that what it says? No. God works how many things? All things. What? After the counsel of his will. According to his purpose. For the good of those who are the called.
That's kind of conflating both Ephesians 1:11 and Romans 8:28.
Correct.
But anyway.
Elect. How many times have we quoted that passage? But there's a theology that lies behind that passage. And it's real easy to mock it. Some of you have heard the Bible Answer Man broadcast I was on with George Bryson, seems like 3 lifetimes ago now. And he wants to bring up the worst possible things that happen in a sinful world. You know what the worst possible thing that ever happened in a sinful world? The crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He was the only innocent person that ever lived. That's the worst thing that's ever happened. And what did the early church say in Acts chapter 4? Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Jews, the Romans,
Jesus laying down his life for our sins is not the worst possible thing that ever happened. Jesus laid down his life for our sins. The fact that people killed him, he let them do it. That is not the worst possible thing that's ever happened okay. Sorry, my little soapbox. Go ahead.
That spawned a whole debate, our discussion, not debate, a whole discussion we had in our forum, because this is another one of those statements like we'll know everything when we get to heaven. And like Dr. White said in the last clip, we'll see how it all worked out, all the injustice. I'm like, well.
Yeah. I like
you. I was hoping you would
highlight. Yeah, I was hoping you would highlight Warren's comment here. The worst thing is the thing they don't talk about. There's a version of this that I'm like, if they're not willing to even countenance some of the things, again, my kind of absurd example is the Erfurt latrine disaster, in which the floor falls out of the church provostry and 60 people drown in rotten sewage. And they were, most of them, believers, right? That's kind of an absurd example. It's horrifying if you really think about it, but that's sort of an absurd example. But also, like, there is a version of this where I could see, yes, the forces of evil uniting in a plan to murder the very Son of God is such a morally horrific and vile thing that they intended. Is almost like the Genesis 50 thing that always gets thrown back in my face as if I don't affirm it, that they intended it for evil, right? But God intended it for good, and such an immeasurable, incalculable good that it is the hope on which all of us rest. right? It is the very thing, his crucifixion, his burial, his resurrection, and his ascension, and the life that is now on offer because of him being willing to lay his life down to create life for us is our hope. And that's one dimension of this. But if you turn the facet from their side, it was a plot. It was a wicked plot cooked up to kill the only truly, perfectly, sinlessly innocent person, the very Son of God, God himself. And that is a vile thing. But there's a version of this where I'm also like, yeah, the worst thing is the thing they won't tell you.
Yeah. What I like about this is he's starting to get a little bit snotty back towards Tim. Tim was being snotty when he said, well, I'm just reading what it says. I didn't say. This is where he's getting snotty now. He's like, do we believe this Bible verse? Well, of course, everyone believes this Bible verse. And of course, Dr. White knows what the Bible says. I mean, but this is where...
Well, again, along these same lines, Pritchett, is where I said last week that I didn't understand with this. Well, God just had no idea X, Y, and Z was going to happen. And it's like, well, you may be overstating it depending on what particular thing we're talking about. But the fact is, that is what's up for debate. If you thought that was too stupid to consider, then why did you accept this debate? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
I just like it when they get snotty back, because now they're both being snotty and they're trying to not act like they're being snotty, but I know, because I'm a snotty person, I know when Tim's being snotty. I know when Dr. White's being snotty. And I'm like, Dr. White's getting snotty here because Tim got snotty about just what the Bible says, and now Dr. White's like, do we believe that? Insinuating that he doesn't. I love the pettiness of this. It's fantastic.
Atheist question that I'm going to highlight here. Honestly, Atheist, who is a beloved friend of this channel, who we pray is going to convert to Christianity at some point in the very
if for no other reason than we need more people in shape on Team Faith.
He says, can something be simultaneously the worst and most beautiful event that has ever occurred?
Yes.
A case could be made.
And let me. I've got to go, guys. I've got a 1 o'clock appointment. So I've
what?
Got to go,
what?
Let me. I'm sorry.
This was going to be a Leighton Flowers stream. We were banking on 5 hours.
I never thought y'all would go over 2 hours, because y'all don't ever do over 2 hours. So I mean, that's one of the things I do, but y'all don't do it.
It's fine.
So
you're already on the thumbnail.
I told a guy I would call him at 1. Anyway, this is a little bit of a soapbox of mine. Proof that God worked through human vessels, free human vessels, to bring about the crucifixion and the redemption of sin does not prove, therefore, he brought about all the sin that was redeemed on the cross of Calvary. That's just a horrible non sequitur. To say that God works within the Pontius Pilates of the world and the Roman soldiers to ensure that his son, who's willingly laying down his life for the sins of the world, is somehow proof that God causes through determinative decretal ways all the sins that Christ redeemed. So Jesus is fixing his own decrees. I mean, Jesus is fixing the Father's decrees. That doesn't make any sense within the constructs of the scriptures. And this is the number one proof text that Calvinists will go to prove that God has the right to decree whatsoever comes to pass and not be found guilty, because look, he decreed the most horrible evil of all time, i.e. the crucifixion of Jesus. But it's still a non sequitur, because you can give examples of where people and or God can work within evil events to bring about a particular evil thing in order to bring about the better good, the greater good for humanity, and still not be implicated in evil. And so if we can give examples of that, which we have, then you don't have to adopt this theistic decretal, deterministic philosophy, and then use the crucifixion, the redemption of sin, as proof that God decreed all the sin that he died to redeem. Again, that's one of my soapboxes, and it's one of those gross non sequiturs that determinists use to somehow prove determinism is morally acceptable, and I think it fails miserably to do so. So that's my
agreed
last soapbox.
Agreed.
Leighton, before you go, because I know you have to, while I'm here live in front of God and everybody, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your ministry. I'm really grateful. I've been a fan for a long time. You have been a constant resource to help me sharpen my thinking, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for what you've contributed to the cause of Christ and how you've contributed to people rightly seeing and understanding the nature and character of God, and working against the lies that would cause them to doubt. So thank you, and I know you got to go.
Well, you're welcome, but my name is actually Braxton. Leighton's the guy. But
I was expecting that from Pritchett. I would have expected that from you, Johnathan.
I was going to say, this is so gross.
I was actually gonna end by saying, well, everything I've learned is from Pritchett, but I thought that would be a disgrace to Pritchett. He would go, "Don't put that on me. Don't put that on me."
I'm waiting for you to learn from Pritchett.
No, I'm proud of my friends, and I'm proud of you, Leighton.
Leighton's amazing.
I love you guys. Yeah. I appreciate it. And
go and be free.
If there's probably going to be a third episode of this anyway, because I can already tell you're not going to get through all these things. So I'll just catch up with y'all.
We haven't even got to Tim yet.
Oh, there's been plenty of me. But I'm down for a round 3 if you guys are.
Yeah, this is great. All right, Leighton, go make your call.
Love you guys.
Bye, Leighton.
Love you, man. All right, we'll let Dr. White finish what he's saying. We won't be Tim during the debate, not letting him finish a statement. We will, because we're being that right now. All right, here we go.
And your counsel predestined to take place. That was the early church's prayer. I believe that. And I believe that everything that led up to that, because that was the fullness of time. God had determined before the Son became incarnate, before the first sunrise on earth, that on that day, in that place, at that time, the Son of God was going to give his life as a ransom for his people. And that means there's a sovereign decree. That means God has exhaustive knowledge of the future. That does not mean God is trapped in something. What it means is when he created, he did it right the first time. He's not running around trying to fix things. Doing plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E.
Yeah, so from a non-open theist perspective, I'm like, a lot of what he says doesn't follow. God has a sovereign decree because he determined, and now I believe that God determines all kinds of things, just like I determine all kinds of things. Doesn't mean determinism is true. But so I'm just like, when I read Acts 4:27-28, without getting into Dr. Flowers' long sting operation analogy and all of that stuff, you go hear it every other week on Soteriology 101, because he says the same things every week. Which is probably not a bad idea because he's way bigger than all of us. But I would say that, yeah, what God had predestined was that Jesus, and I think even an open theist could affirm it this way, would predestine that Jesus would be the sacrificial lamb for the sins of humanity. And that's what his hand had predetermined to occur. That's his hand and his predetermined plan, or his great mighty, that's what the word is, his great mightiness, plural mightiness, purpose to occur. I don't go the route of like some open theists where God wanted to turn them into automatons, and so he did. Some open theists even think that that's necessary. I don't even think that's necessary. I'm saying, yeah, those are the players that did the very thing that God had predetermined to occur. Now, I go a little bit further than the open theist and say, in the Molinist thing, yeah, I mean, that happened at that place at that time specifically. But for an open theist, it could have been you can go any number of years prior for it to have been gamed out. And the Neo-molinism, just like with, so I don't really understand, even with Dr. Flowers, again, sting operation, elaborate, that's great. But he used it in our debate too. Great. But I'm just thinking, I don't see how determinism or sovereign decree, which is coded language for determinism, if you're a decretalist and not a determinist, I don't see how determinism and sovereign decree and all of that, the way that Calvinists understand, follows from Acts chapter 4 at all. And then, Braxton,
I think of. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I would like Braxton, if you disagree with my non-open theist take, give me your take, or if you agree with what I just said, we'll let Tim tell us.
I wasn't listening. I was focusing on the fact that people are upset at how Molinism has been pronounced Molinism instead of Molinism.
Yeah, it's Luis de Molina. It's Molina.
I'm from Arkansas, so I'm not.
You call Muslims Moslems like old-timey people did?
Look, Moslems, yeah.
It doesn't, I'm saying it correctly I'm not like Leighton Flowers who can't pronounce words. I'm Johnathan Pritchett who sounds like I am because I'm a hick.
They reprobate. They reprobate.
Reprobate. There's two different things going on. Leighton Flowers not knowing Bavink, and it says Bavnik or what. And then there's me who knows.
Bavnik. No, that's the correct. I don't know.
But there's me who understands how to say it, but I sound like I say it wrong simply because I'm almost as twangy as Dr. David Allen, but not quite. There's a difference.
So funny.
Anyway,
So
so y'all
funny.
shut up about how we say words, especially with late night. So Tim, I know you have some thoughts. Braxton wasn't listening, so he's just going to agree with me on whatever I said.
Yeah.
Probably
Real quick. Pastor's thought said, think about Jesus. We are told he only does and only says what he hears and sees the Father say and do. And he had a specific timetable for all he did. What does that do for the determinism talk?
So when he said
nothing, not a thing.
Yeah, let's not push this too far because I mean, let's not turn that into some sort of metaphysics, right?
Let me omniscient, not omnisciently, but semi-omnisciently say what Jonathan's about to say. Jonathan's about to say that doesn't work because he could say that he only does or says whatever Braxton Hunter tells him he can say or do, and all these kind of things. And and he can even know some things about what's going to happen tomorrow. It doesn't entail determinism.
Right.
Well, and sure, it's wonderful that Jesus only said and did what he saw his Father saying and doing, and did only what he was, what he was told by the Father, let's say. But is that true of everyone? Does it mean, therefore, that everyone only does what they see the Father saying and doing, or what the Father tells them to do? I don't.
So when the Father did the
outflow.
Father tell Jesus to say, "Not my will, but Thy will be done," or so? I mean,
buddy, don't even get me started on the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Because Jesus is saying,
get started, man. At this point, who cares? Let's go 5 hours.
He's only caring about the mission because that's what the Father has purpose for him in this incarnation. He's not saying that I'm a automaton. Yeah. Okay.
This is okay. So since we surfaced it, there's two things I wanted to bring up. 1 Corinthians 2:7-8, where I brought it up in the debate.
Yeah.
Beautiful passage, incredible passage. But 1 Corinthians 2:7, I'm just going to read the NASB. It's Paul talking, and he says, "But we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages to our glory." And he's talking about the gospel. He's talking about Jesus's willingness to sacrifice himself and to die to rescue and redeem people, right? I think that that's beautiful. And he's clearly saying before time, right? It's literally the word pro there. It's before. So before time began, God had a plan set in place that would lead to rescue and redemption, and that involved the sacrifice of the Son. It's his mystery, and it was a mystery that was hidden before, but it was God's wisdom. The very next verse is the one that says that if the rulers of this age had known what they were doing, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. I just find that so interesting. But then also when I'm thinking about that's just one thing, kind of what we were talking about before. But now that we've surfaced the idea of the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't know how. Okay, I would like to hear from you guys. When I read Jesus saying, "If it's possible, please take this cup away from me," I hear him saying, he's expressing, God, if it is possible, can we take the plan in a different direction? I hear him expressing that. I think he knows that that's not the case. I think he knows that this is the way forward. The Father tells him no, and he's willing to submit himself. And he's saying, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. The plan of redemption will go through. But in the moment, in his anguish, I hear him asking, God, can this go in a different direction, please? I hear that. And I think you probably would affirm that, but I just kind of want to hear you guys' perspective on how you cash that out from a Molinist.
Well, let me say something. I haven't talked in a little while. So since your screen is off, continue with clipping your nails or whatever, Pritchett. But what I would say in response to that is to say, look, Jesus, obviously in the end of Luke chapter 2, after the ordeal where he goes missing and ends up in the temple, it says that he grew in stature and knowledge and all those sorts of things. And so in his earthly ministry, Jesus didn't have the omniscience, or we could say chose not to have the omniscience that would give those kinds of answers. And so this would not serve as a satisfactory proof text for open theism, I would say.
Sure. The case would need to be made from other places, but it's like we don't want to go into the passage assuming any view, right? Assuming my view, your view, Dr. White's view. We want to say, what does the text naturally sustain? So I'm not going to press it hard. I'm happy with your answer.
Yeah, the thing is, you and I would both agree, Tim. You and I would both agree that Jesus didn't have absolute certainty about some particulars of his earthly ministry, and
sure.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, for me, I mean, this was one of those things that for Greg Boyd, this blew his mind, and I'm like, No, actually, I think there's you could probably find a lot trickier things to stump us over than that one.
I'm not in search of anything to stump. I've said this.
I'm just
Warren and I
saying
have
there's a
conversation.
lot more that caused me to give Paul. And in fact, going back to philosophy, one of the things that Braxton and we like to think around here. So Braxton gave us a philosophical argument for open theists that stumped us for about a month.
I didn't come up with it, but I thought I came up with it. It's one of those things where I didn't come up with it, but at the time I thought, has anyone else ever said this? Yeah. And they have. It was the whole thing about if all believers affirm a future that is always approaching but never arriving at infinity, it's an everlasting future. So we're always approaching but never arriving at infinity, because infinity is more of a philosophical. It's like the cross section of philosophy and mathematics. It's always more, you know. So how could God have exhaustive knowledge of a truly infinite future? And typically apologists
transverse it when you can't transverse it.
Well, you don't. Well, see, that's where it comes in. So typically this arises from the whole thing about, it often comes up with the Kalam cosmological argument with the impossibility of a past infinite series of events, because
an actual infinite thing.
Yeah, an actual infinite, because how could we cross it? How could time cross it? And so this is looking forward into the future and saying, look, God's knowledge would have to cross an actual infinite series of actual events that are actually infinite, you know, to have the kind of knowledge that we want to say that he has. Now, when I dug, I know I'm not the first one to think of this, because I found the journal articles and stuff related to it. And believe it or not, William Lane Craig was one of the journal articles and had responded on this. And his response was to say, well, that's because, well, first of all, say an actual infinite, we're talking about something that exists in physical reality. Right. And what we're talking about here is cognitive in the mind of God. But secondly, what we're saying is God, or his response was that God's knowledge is cognitively simple. And so if someone casts back to what I said about how God doesn't have to go through a series of thoughts to arrive at a new conclusion, because that would be a form of learning, then what it's actually like is, I don't have to ask you, Tim, what number, or like when I ask you what number comes after 48, you don't have to cross numbers 1 through 48 to arrive at 49. You simply know. You literally simply, you know. And so that only works with you up to a certain within numbers like we are used to thinking of. But even in the infinity, perhaps God's knowledge is simple. He's cognitively simple in the sense that he simply can know whatever it is without crossing that infinite chain to arrive at that knowledge. Now, I'm not claiming, this is where I'll say, like Alan Rhoda in the book, where he constantly says, I'm not saying this proves open theism. I'm saying that it makes it the best category among those that are available. And I would say that this is a fair response to this, but I'm not claiming
I'm
that
less keen on it still, because I'm like, even though it's not an actual infinite, because it doesn't go infinite backwards, it just goes forwards and you're just always adding one. It never runs out.
That's not why it's an actual infinite, though. Why it's not an actual infinite.
Yeah, actual means in reality, in existence.
Right. Yeah. I know that, but I mean, his thoughts also exist in reality. So, because he exists.
I have God two kind of fun thoughts on
in the mind of God, there is an unending.
Pritchett, quit taking away from my point. Let Tim answer.
He's going to say you can't get out of it. Pritchett's right to kind of squinch at it and say that's why he doesn't know, because that amount of future thoughts can't exist because it's infinite. But
what I was actually going to say, so there's two sides to this. My view, this is actually something that we'll say is maybe problematic for my view, actually, because we're talking about, I don't think, okay, so God has infinite understanding and he has an infinite processing capability to understand what's
qualitatively.
Sure. Right. So, because you can't quantify infinity, of course, but what's so funny is that I made a statement or a couple of statements during the course of the debate when I said something along the lines of, my opponent is putting God's knowledge in a box only of what will be, rather than letting him outside of the box to know what could be also, right? So middle knowledge has rightly been called a huge expansion of the categories of things that God can know. Okay, in a philosophical stance, he knows all subjunctive counterfactuals and the truth values of all possible, futures, and that to an infinite degree, where it's positing an infinite number of possible worlds as well, right? In which all of those different permutations could change, and all the different second and third order consequences of all that. We'll grant that. Okay, that's what Molinism says. If I were to go for the most, like the closest view to that, that's like on our sliding scale of 0 to 100%, where it's still like 99.9% known by God, all of it, right? The Neo-molinism, where there's just a couple of things, maybe it's just a couple of things that he knows it might go this way or might go that way. That's still a further expansion of his knowledge, where he knows possibilities. He knows he's got a gain in possibilities, which I just find really, really interesting. So it's it's more of a problem to my view.
So Tim, let's talk you and I, because I don't think you want your view confused as Molinism, and I don't want my view confused as open theism, even though I don't take that as an insulting charge.
Neither do I. Yeah.
People will often say that dynamic omniscience is basically Molinism. I think you and I would reject that. And the reason we would reject that is because I see why people say that. They want to say, well, because the Molinists want to say God knows all these possible worlds, and therefore he knows all these possibly branching futures. He's just going to select one of them as the actual world, we might say. Whereas on your view, he's aware of all these possibly branching futures, and there is no unique actual future. That it really could be any of these. But see, that right there is the primary difference that makes open theism and Molinism very, very different, like as different as they could be in this respect. Because
that's the demarcation line.
Yeah, if you're imagining the future on an open theist perspective from our position right now, you're imagining a line that is branching what seemingly infinite number of times, right? Even if it's not actually an infinite number. Whereas the Molinist sees one line, the one that actually happens.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And that is about as different as two views can possibly be. It's just that the Molinist, this is actually helpful for me to talk through. The Molinist thinks that huge array of potential branching off futures is what God knows logically prior to creation.
Exactly.
And chooses among those. Whereas the open theist, the dynamic omniscience proponent, thinks that is happening still in time, and God is interacting still in time along those possible futures. But the point is, open theism and Molinism are very, very different, but dynamic omniscience does have a paradigm of thinking about the future that looks a little bit like the Molinist idea of possible worlds.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're right. There's a very clear demarcation line. And on a Molinist view, the future is a unique actual future that is a settled line of truth, where all of the truth values of all that will transpire are known ahead of time by God and have been known since before the creation of the world. Totally. The similarity is that in the same way that a Molinist posits in God's middle knowledge that he knows the truth value of all subjunctive counterfactuals, a neo-Molinist can say there are some things that are not. If this set of inputs, then that will transpire. There's if this set of inputs, then these things might transpire. So there's might counterfactuals as well as would, like will. Some things are will counterfactuals, right?
Yeah.
If this set of inputs, then this will happen is something that God knows about many things. And again, we got inferences in scripture where we got the David and Keilah. You've got the, if I stay, will the people hand me over to Saul? And God says, yes, they will. That's a statement about a future possible outcome. And that's constantly levied as sort of the Molinist proof text, which is totally fine. It's a statement about what will happen. Okay. If we go this way, but if we go this way, then it'll be different. God knows what will happen on both of those scenarios. Right. But the neo-Molinists would simply posit the existence of might counterfactuals or could counterfactuals in addition to would or will.
So would you affirm with us, or would you agree? Earlier, I got you to agree that in some texts that are open theist proof texts, that if someone were to employ Pritchett's experiential knowledge explanation, that would not make us committed to open theism. So would you, like, if that's Pritchett's response, would you still say, no, Pritchett, you're not an open theism, an open
Correct.
theist? Okay. Because
Yeah,
there
I
were
think that
some
he- I
people
think
last
that
week
he's-
saying, welcome to open theism.
Yeah, no, I think he submitted that suggestion. Now, okay, I could press you on this. He submitted that suggestion in order to not affirm dynamic
Right.
omniscience. The reason for
And
surfacing
admitted
the
I'm
idea
doing
that it
it.
was experience, right? Admitted you were doing it. The reason for surfacing the possibility that it, I would contend that it's not what the text says, but neither here nor there. If the reason for surfacing the possibility that it's an experiential knowledge gain is the reason to avoid dynamic omniscience,
Right.
I would say that they're perfectly consistent saying that that's the meaning behind their rejection of what I would consider the face value reading in order to go for that alternative interpretation.
Yeah, I mean,
the charge comes from someone like Warren, and I can see kind of his point where he's saying any gain in knowledge, any gain in experiential knowledge, any gain in knowledge at all is a open view, because there's open in two senses. There's two senses. The future, the nature of the future is open in that it could be alethically or epistemically or ontologically open to possibility. Okay, things could go one way or the other. But there's also a branch inside of open theism where it's not so much about God's relationship to the future so much as his openness to relationality with the creation.
Rejecting divine impassibility, for example.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, which
Things
I
like that.
admitted what I'm doing. Now, I would say that you are rejecting the obvious plain reading of the text. You're just not smart enough to know those kind of categories like I do. But neither here nor there, like you said, neither here nor there now. But my question,
I'm not grading dissertations, so here's
my question
I
for
say?
you is, I should have probably asked Warren this 100 years ago, and I forgot because he's my age. He's really old. But I didn't ask this. So given that explanation you just gave, and presentism, okay, given those two things, at what point is it then in dynamic omniscience, does all of those possibilities take hold in God's mind? Because on the one hand, they could all be there, and then therefore they would shrink as free choices were made that cut off certain possibilities. Or is there an ebb and flow where he has at creation bringing the physical cosmos into existence, if it's however you define physical for idealists listening, so brings in the cosmos. At that point, when it's brought in, is that where the most knowledge of possibilities exist for God, and then it narrows? Or is that when there's probably the most, and then it narrows and it may branch open again, given some of the choices made or some of the events that occur in creation following just natural process? Or how does that work?
Great question. So on the version of openness that is closest to your view and simply allows for some things to be open-ended, but 99.9% of it is still known. Okay. And again, this is a debate amongst open theists where we think the actual percentage of things are on the sliding scale that are known or not known. But on the version of openness where it's as close as possible to your view, just a couple of things. Okay. I think of this in terms of, again, I described it in the debate as the past is a settled line of what happened. It's an accurate and complete record of past presence in a presentist ontology discussion. It's an accurate record of past presence that God knows exhaustively everything that happened and why. Okay?
But he doesn't forget what could have been.
Okay, that's an interesting discussion that's sort of separate from the point I'm going to make, because I don't disagree with that either.
Right.
What I'm saying is that the openness view, there are possibilities that as things transpire and actualize, get cut off. They are now no longer possible. So the knowledge set that God has, where he exhaustively and perfectly knows the future as partly comprised of open possibilities are getting shut off all the time as things transpire and actualize. So if, let's just use...
Let me give you an example, because I was thinking about this today as I was reading the book that touched on this that you recommended. So like if a man is trying to decide between marrying the girl that he loves or going into military service off to war in, say, Vietnam. And so he makes the decision to enlist, and now he's on the plane going to Vietnam. This has closed off the future possibility of him getting married in Birmingham, Alabama the next day, let's say.
Right. A great example is the movie It's a Wonderful Life, right? Where an entire future alternate storyline is posited where he was never born, where George Bailey was never born. And the entire story from that point takes on the shape of, look at all of these things that would have changed, all the second and third order consequences of your absence in this town of Bedford Falls, what it would look like with your absence. And his brother Harry dies. Harry died because he wasn't there to save Harry. And then all those men on that transport who were, soldiers in World War II, they all died because Harry wasn't there. So there are definitely second and third order consequences and second and third order possibilities that I think God is always
depiction of Molinism.
I would say it's a beautiful depiction of dynamic omniscience. God is always navigating away from possible futures that lead to things that he doesn't want to be possible. Right? He's constantly working against. Again, I would say that there are evil beings who have wills opposed to God's. I would say humans are often, we willfully enslave ourselves, but we're also under attack from those beings.
Amen.
Who are constantly at work from God against God's purposes. And God is constantly navigating away from the set of emergent probabilities and possibilities that is most destructive to his creation. It's a wonder we're in as good a shape as we are, given how awful humanity is and how awful God's enemies are. But that's testament to God's goodness and his ability to bring about beautiful outcomes in spite of billions, if not trillions, of awful, evil people opposed to him, evil creatures opposed to him. But
real quick, what are your thoughts on what a pastor's thoughts says here? Thank you for your super chat. He says, in 2 Kings 19:25, God claims to have determined, planned, and brought about all the conquests of Neo-Assyria. What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
Such a good question. I don't ever want to answer a question without looking at the passage itself. So 2 Kings 19:25 it is. Okay. So I would like to dig it up.
Can go back and maybe he can give his thoughts while you're looking it up and thinking about it. But
I've got it, but I'd like to hear Pritchett's thoughts too.
Pritchett, where are you? Well, my thoughts on
trying to stay awake after so much time elapses without me saying anything.
So I can't see you though.
My thoughts without my thoughts without even having to look up the passage, and not because I have the whole Bible memorized, but just
wait. Here's my simple answer. Okay. God can determine and harden people for his purposes, but that doesn't mean he does it to everyone. Go, Pritchett.
I determine, I plan, and I bring about all sorts of things that involve not without divine determinism, by the way. All sorts of things that involve the billions and trillions of free will decisions of people that were made 300 years ago, which may not have how much butterfly effect do we want to bring in there? I don't think I need to care what was going on in 7th century, Africa to try to say what I'm doing now needs all of those decisions to have been perfectly whatever. But even that, I don't have the power to determine whatever that was, but yet I do have the power to determine, plan, and bring about all of my conquests over Braxton and Leighton and Tim Stratton's schedules, right? And I don't need determinism. So if I can do that to people who have their own free will decisions and bring about my conquest to absolutely destroy and wreck their social lives, how much more can God determine and plan and bring about all sorts of conquests for Neo-Assyria without divine determinism? And I can do it on my level with hard-headed people like Braxton. God can easily do this. This is
Tim. Tim,
yeah.
If you found out for sure, like Jesus appeared to you in a way that you were absolutely Cartesianly certain, like your own existence, that it was Jesus communicating with you, and you could trust whatever he said, and he said, "You know what? Sometimes my Father did determine particular people to do certain things," would you then say my entire worldview falls apart?
Oh goodness, no.
Would you say your open theism falls apart?
No, because God, of course, can determine some things. He can. What's funny? Okay, so I found the passage, and I just kind of was reading. Sorry, Pritchett, I wasn't listening to you at all.
Well, I was just going to say, let's not equivocate determine with determinism. I determine things all day long.
Determinism, qua determinism.
Yeah, determinism and decree can also happen. Like to determine something and to decree it is also not, it's not all things, it's not totalizing, and it doesn't have to be pre-creation divine decree. It can be in the moment, maybe months or weeks or years before it happens. God can decree something. He can make a declaration about what he's going to bring about, and it doesn't have to be a pre-creation decree. But yeah, I'm reading this whole passage, and it's obviously extraordinarily interesting. But yeah, first off, it says, "Have you not heard?" This is the verse he surfaced, 2 Kings 19:25. "Have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass, that you should turn fortified cities into heaps of ruins." The word "all" isn't anywhere in that verse. Of course, God can utilize Assyria as a punitive sort of a weapon to bring about judgment on other nations. That they should turn fortified cities into heaps of ruins does not mean all fortified cities into heaps of ruins, right? He didn't do it to all cities, and he didn't necessarily use them to bring all cities that maybe they also brought fortified cities to heaps of ruins that was outside of the ones God wanted them to do. The text doesn't sustain the word "all" there. You have to import the word "all" in order to assume that he does it. But then later in this very passage, God is saying that he will prevent the Assyrians from doing that to the Israelites. He will prevent them from doing it to Jerusalem. He's like, the angel of the Lord goes and strikes down 185,000 people in the camp of the Assyrians, and Sennacherib is looking about it, and he departs and goes home and lives at Nineveh.
And if the text doesn't give you a time frame, don't insert logically prior to the creation of a temporal universe every time God says he determines or plans, or that could have been last week, the week before that happened. I mean, it doesn't tell us, but you can't just bring up these texts. Not saying that our super chatter here is doing that, but people will bring up texts and just assume that, well, if God planned to determine and brought about this thing or that thing or the other thing, that was all an eternal decree and logic prior to the creation. You can't do that if it does. I mean, as far as God could be not the Molinist, non-open theist, whatever, could still say, I mean, as far as like planning that, I mean, yeah, just.
But now I'm looking at verse 28, and it says, "Because you have raged against me," it's in the same poetic meditation,
right?
"Because you have raged against me, and your complacency has come into my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came."
Yeah, the Bible doesn't shy away. The Canaanites were disaster for 400 something years. Okay.
Oh, buddy,
Pritchett, don't use profanity now.
I didn't.
I know you get upset when you talk about the Canaanites.
They had it coming. That's what I tell atheists who whine about it, and Christians who don't like the God of the Old Testament, the Neo-Marcians. The Canaanites had it coming. They deserved it. Anyway, get over it. God, Jesus, I have the tumbler over there. Jesus flooded back. Anyway, so what I'm saying is there's not a time for it, but because you have raised, that could have been, how long was that going on? I don't know that it says, but apparently they've been raging for a while. And so God's like, I'm determining and planning, and I'm going to wipe you out, and I'm going to bring this about. Because
how many times how long were the Canaanites involved in it?
Well, the Bible says,
400 plus years was how long he held off bringing his.
Well, it doesn't say 400. I'm just saying the Bible has no problem giving us time references for how awful people are before he executes a judgment against them. So here it gives us no time. It says they have been raging against him, and he's like, so I determined he goes, as you could be it doesn't help any of our positions, is what I'm saying. No metaphysical claim to read back into eternity. God could have.
It's not a gotcha for any of us. It's
right.
Not.
It's just saying God got sick of this stuff and determined and planned to bring it. Could have happened just while he was getting sick of them. So
and I don't have to import any presuppositions into that text to make sense of it as it's written either.
Right.
I don't have to. Yeah.
And you try that with every possible text before you have to punt somewhere else. And
may I speak?
Right.
For all of us. Yes.
May I speak? I just want to say the church split is here. Tim, have you ever heard of the church split?
I was live on Will's program earlier in the week.
Knew that. You didn't know that because you don't like Will.
I did know. I actually showed up and commented.
I didn't watch it.
Will is my daughter's youth pastor. And in fact, last night or Wednesday night, I took 6 kids to youth group. I only have 2 kids because I'm interested in that. And Will really impresses me. My kids love him. Anyway, I just want to say that the church split is in a sort of podcast consortium that we haven't talked about yet, that is going to be a big part of our future going forward. We're trying to create something that would be like the Christian worldview side of like a Daily Wire type setup, where you have multiple different YouTubers, podcasters who all have a unified intent and are pushing toward an ultimate goal that is similar. And for us, it's trying to help people who are far from God get closer to God. And the Church Split is in that with us. And so it's kind of a sister group. But I just wanted to mention them and the love that we have for them. If you don't have a subscription yet to Church Split, you can do that. It's free. You don't even have to pay for this subscription. Imagine you used to have to pay for like magazine subscriptions. It doesn't cost any. I don't think it costs anything to become a member of the Overlap. Does it, Tim? Is that also free?
It doesn't.
This is unbelievable. This is, how could you pass up this opportunity? Anyway, Pritchett. Also, Nick has put something on the screen. I don't know what this is. It certainly isn't. Someone would have to take a picture of that with an iPhone and then copy paste it to put it up there. But this is a link to something. If you would just go to the New Testament Theologist and click on their community tab, Nick is going to hear what I'm saying and go put that link there so that you can actually click it. So go to the New Testament Theologist and subscribe, and then also click this link. Do you have any idea what this is about, Tim?
Yeah, that's for Will Hess's injury and the recovery. That's a GoFundMe to help kind of fund that. Yeah.
Yes, who does not understand his own limitations as he ages. He's an old man too. He just hasn't accepted it yet. Do not try backflips over 30. That's the lesson there.
Yeah. Well, I love
Pastor
the concept of
says for $10. I know I put you on the spot with the 2 Kings passage. Sorry, chapter 18 is important to the context. Well, we'll look into that. I know that this particular issue is one that comes up as a proof text for determinism in some of these debates. But hopefully we gave you some things to think about. Pritchett, should we work on winding this down? Because I put a poll. Let's just see where it's at right now. I put a poll and I asked, should we do this again next week? I don't even know if Tim's able to do it again next week. But it looks like 60 people have voted and 93% say yes.
Yeah, because they're enjoying our conversation from the debate. We promised it. I promised before you guys, I should never let y'all speak, but I promise for all the people telling me to shut up. Look, I'm trying to get through. I promised people that we would have Tim respond to his own comments, and we never got to it. We made it through just White's rebuttal.
Tim, can you join us again next week?
I am open and I'm happy to book the time. So if we're keeping this gravy train rolling, I'm having a lot of fun.
I'm calling Dr. Flowers.
So what I want to do is I want to be, because I had clips for one show that we would get through the opening statements, the rebuttals, and the cross X, and we didn't get that far. I don't like live streaming for 9 hours. I'm busy.
Hello, you've reached a voicemail for Leighton Flowers. Sorry I missed your call. Leave a message and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks and God bless.
Dr. Flowers, you're live right now, and we would like to know if you'll join us again next Friday at the same bat time, same bat channel to continue this discussion of open theism, Calvinism, with more comments from you and Tim than from me and Pritchett. Guys, do you have anything to say in response to Dr. Flowers while we make this message?
I know how to withhold your paychecks if you don't show up.
I have no threat to levy over you, but would love to spend some more time talking about it.
See you later, Leighton.
So next week we can do this. We'll get to definitely going to be able to start with your rebuttal, and then we'll get into as far as we can in the cross X, because I actually have fewer clips from your rebuttal than White's, because White said some things that I thought we would all need to respond to. But I would like to get into the clips from you. So I was going to get to this, but Braxton talks me out of it. Just heads up. The Romans 8:28 reading, and I posted some stuff in the forum that I think that you saw that this is nothing new, but because we're going through Romans, and right now we are in Romans 8, and a couple of Monday nights from next Monday, like 3 weeks, I guess, we're going to be getting to Romans 8:28, and since we're going to be talking about the variant and the alternate translations and all that for probably an hour, I didn't want to bring that up here, but I wanted to formally and cordially invite you on a Monday night to come talk about that, since you're interested in that.
Wow. Yeah. Whatever that would look like. Any way I can contribute, any way I can, when you were mentioning like the consortium of podcasts stuff earlier, if there's a way for me to join in on that, whatever it would look like. I love this stuff. So
Monday nights, you can come anytime on Monday nights, but because we were going to talk about that variant, and you saw I posted that from the NIV Study Bible from 1985, which is almost 40 years ago, which means it was being prepared before it was published, means over 40 years, people have been talking about this alternate translation, that you can do that with or without the variant, the hatheos. So we're going to go into all of that. And so we didn't want to talk about it on any of these reviews because we're going to be talking about it so much into depth. But I want you can come any Monday night you want to talk about the book of Romans, whether open theism is in view or not, whatever. I think Warren has shown up once. He's also welcome to come anytime because he gets the link. I'll loop you in. So Monday nights at 6:30, Braxton never shows up anymore. He used to. He doesn't love me anymore, so he stopped caring. But I
love you relentlessly, Pritchett.
But you, Tim, if you want to, any Monday night at 6:30, but I do want you to try. Give you some advance notice so that when we get to Romans 8:28, you can participate in that and give your thoughts why you brought that up in the debate and all that as well.
But you could show up this Monday. It's fine.
Yeah.
Hey,
you can
Tim, I just want you to know that I hope you've come away from this realizing that we feel like we met someone here who is cut from the same cloth as us, even if we disagree on a issue of scripture or theology. And you're our brother. We love you. We like you. We want to support you and promote you any way we can. And so anytime that you want to come on Trinity Radio, just let us know. And I know the audience feels the same way.
I'm thrilled. I'm deeply, deeply honored by that. Again, the appreciation is returned all the more. You guys have been wonderful. And I'll simply put it this way. Being that my most recent church experience was a very strict independent fundamental Baptist sort of a context, I'll just say that I'm used to being disagreed with and still loved. So that's kind of everybody.
That's our brand around here, bro.
Yeah. Will Hess comes from that same background. He said, I'm used to being disagreed with and hated. So,
well, I'm used to that too. All right. I'm used to that too. But I'm also.
That sounds like a completely different thing than you would hear on the church split about the independent fundamentalist Baptists. But anyway, thank you everybody for coming. You have a reason to come back next week. Thank you for everyone who has stuck around this long, because this is, I guess because of Flowers, y'all are used to this. I'm not. I hate it. I've got to go to the bathroom and I have other things I got to get to. So thank you everybody for coming. Go subscribe to Tim's channel. He needs to get up there with our number of subscribers. Go subscribe. He doesn't just talk about open theism, right? You talk about all kinds of things.
All kinds of things.
Because I checked it out.
Ecclesiology, talking about the nature of God's plans for the future and the Olivet Discourse. Yeah, we've got a lot of fun stuff on a lot of different things.
All right. Well, what do you got coming up?
So I'm riding the wave of the debate. I have been enjoying the content. Yeah. Yeah. Dr. White is an endless fountain of content. I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, my next year or so, I'm planning on circling back around and talking about more of those living in light of eternity things, and trying to really flesh out what a biblical eschatology should look like in terms of what we should all agree on, not different views on the rapture, different views on the millennium. Those are all things that we've been arguing about for a long, long time. But really, what is most important? What should we agree on, and how do we live in light of that reality? And that's kind of where I'm headed for the next year. Yep.
And Biblical Rose Gallery returns Monday night. We missed last week because it was my anniversary, and that was more important. And we didn't do it on Will's channel again because the subs go down and the views go down when we when it's on the flags. No, I'm just kidding. But Braxton, what else do we got coming up on Trinity Radio?
This coming week on Trinity Radio, the first ever from Trinity Radio Fake Animation Studios.
Yes, this is awesome.
We are going to present to you with the slight support of artificial intelligence. Slight. And I mean slight because a lot of this work took me hours and hours of detailed involvement. But we are going to present to you a classic debate from 1968 between two very famous historical figures, one of whom a Netflix documentary was made about her in the past 5 years. And there was never any video of it. It was only audio. And it's a debate that I really enjoyed when I first got into apologetics. And now there's video that we have created in cartoon form. And that's going to come early next week from Trinity Radio. 3 hours of enjoyable interaction, zany, hilarious, serious, heartbreaking, salvific. It's going to be fantastic.
And
sounds like a blast.
And even some of those things, right? At least some of those. All right. And also, if you want more formal education, you also go to trinitysem.edu and learn from professors such as myself and Braxton Hunter and Leighton Flowers and Tim Stratton and Jim Chatham and a bunch of people you've actually heard of before. So go check us out at trinitysem.edu. And with that, we will see you all next time on Trinity.